Hello and welcome to Quiet Hours, a place where the world slows down and mysterious stories fill the silence of the night. Before we begin, make sure you're comfortable and ready to relax. And if you enjoy these relaxing horror stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Now, let the quiet take over and the story begin. In 1986, I was dating a young man from a small town just outside of Savannah, Georgia. There was an immediate attraction between us, but I could sense a lingering shadow from his past. His last relationship still haunted him in ways that he couldn't fully explain. She'd been a student at the Savannah College of Art and Design and, as he described it, had dabbled in things paranormal. Though he never gave me the full story, he hinted at an involvement with people in Savannah who frightened him. My own experiences with the paranormal made it easy for me to accept his impressions. I could feel that whatever connection he and his ex had shared was intense and unfinished, though she no longer wanted to be with him. It was a contradiction I couldn't fully explain. That spring break, we decided to visit Savannah and his family. We arrived in town on a rainy March day, and as we drove through the streets, I was taken aback by an uneasy feeling. Despite my love for all things Southern, I couldn't shake the heaviness in the air or the chaotic energy lingering in the city. As we walked near a row of pubs, we encountered a group of rowdy rangers from the nearby base. Their raucousness, fueled by alcohol, felt almost menacing, as if it had stirred something dark within them. I was relieved when we left the city and headed for his parents' home, about 30 miles away. Their home was beautiful, something straight out of Southern living. A classic house on acres of lovely pastureland, filled with antiques in every room. This felt like the South I idolized. His family was warm and welcoming, teasing me about being a Yankee, despite my Southern roots, and good-naturedly poking fun at their own quirks. After the long drive and an already eventful day, I was more than ready to settle in for the night. Exhausted, I headed to the room I'd be staying in and did something unusual for me. I fell asleep as soon as I hit the bed, still in my clothes. But my sleep was anything but peaceful. In a vivid nightmare, a group of figures surrounded my bed, emerging from the shadows near the bedroom door. Among them was a large African man, dressed in a priest's robe and wearing an unsettling mask, accompanied by several other figures, and, most strikingly, my boyfriend's ex. Though I'd never seen her, I somehow knew it was her. They were discussing what to do with me, and then, to my horror, the priest drew a dagger and raised it, ready to strike me. I couldn't move or scream, trapped in the nightmare. Suddenly, I heard her voice. "We cannot. She has a cross over her heart." The priest hesitated and finally relented. I jolted awake, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of the disturbing dream. I don't wear a cross, much less over my heart, but as strange as it may sound, the stitching on the bra I was wearing formed a St. Andrew's cross right over my heart. When morning came, I was eager to tell my boyfriend about the dream. He listened quietly and then said, "She was involved with Satanists in Savannah. I didn't want to scare you, but that's what it was." I asked him if he had a picture of her, wanting to see if she matched the woman I'd seen in my dream. He went to his room and returned with a photo. It was her, exactly as I'd seen her. Then he pointed to an antique chair beside the door, covered with blankets. "Is this where the group came from?" he asked. I nodded, and he pulled the blankets away, revealing a dark, ornate teakwood chair back inlaid with abalone and pearls. The inlay formed a design that looked unsettlingly like an African mask. "My ex always said this chair gave her the creeps," he added. The encounter left me uneasy. Part of me wondered if, despite the dark energy I sensed around her, the ex-girlfriend had somehow protected me in the dream. Maybe she had gotten in over her head with something dangerous, something she couldn't escape, but had kept me from harm. Thankfully, I didn't have any more experiences in his family's home, though we stayed clear of the city for the rest of our trip. Back home in the north, I'd hoped that whatever strange energy we'd encountered would stay in Savannah. But soon, disturbing dreams began haunting me. I'd dream that my boyfriend was being pulled away by some dark force, and in each dream, I tried desperately to hold on to him. When I'd wake, I couldn't rouse him from his sleep. It was as if he were trapped somewhere else, in a place that didn't feel safe. I knew I had to do something. One day, we visited a science museum where a docent showed us a rattlesnake and gave me a piece of its shed skin. Somehow, I felt this skin could be an offering, a way to end the connection to the priest in my dream. With a kind of quiet determination, I burned the snakeskin in our fireplace, imagining it as a ritual to send him away. After that, the paranormal occurrences stopped. But not long after, the relationship ended. We'd been together for a year, but it had been an eventful one, filled with strange experiences that were hard to fully comprehend. In the end, I was left with memories of that unsettling trip, the dream that still feels real, and the question of what forces we might have encountered in Savannah, Georgia, all those years ago. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. In the early 1990s, I moved into a small 3-bedroom house on the east side of Athens, Georgia, while attending the university. I ended up staying there for nearly 9 years even after graduating, and over that time a number of roommates came and went. Oddly, although the house was brand new when we moved in and had no history, strange things began happening that none of us could explain. One of the first unusual events I remember happened as I was walking past the kitchen one day. The kitchen had a cutout opening with a countertop facing the living area. As I passed, I heard a loud clack and realized that a small glass bottle, which had been on the counter, had somehow come off, hit a bar stool, and landed on the floor near where my roommate was sitting. It seemed to have traveled far too far to have simply fallen, and given that it was a square bottle, it wouldn't have rolled on its own. I distinctly felt like it had been thrown, right as I walked by. In those days, the university was on the quarter system, and after finals in early December, there was a month-long break. My roommates went home, but I stayed alone because of my job. One night, I woke to the sound of my dog growling, her eyes fixed on the open doorway, staring out into the house. She refused to move, digging her paws into the floor, a very unusual thing for her because, as a lab, she was typically quite bold. I tried to coax her out to investigate with me, but she wouldn't budge. Feeling uneasy, I crept to the kitchen, grabbed a knife, quickly looked around, and returned to bed, locking the bedroom door behind me. I can't swear it was paranormal, but it certainly unsettled me. Over the years, other odd things would happen, usually in bursts, then months of calm would follow. Radios would turn on by themselves. A low growling noise would sometimes come from the front bedroom, and one roommate even reported seeing a shadow figure. Shortly before I moved out, I was vacuuming and noticed that a small hand-carved lion statue on the table was facing the wall. This wasn't the first time. I turned it back around several times before, though I hadn't really questioned it until then. I fixed its position and continued vacuuming, moving in a circle around the table. When I looked back, I saw that the lion had turned to face the wall again. Though these events were strange, what I remember most about the house was the heavy feeling in the air. It had an almost indescribable weight to it, as if the air itself was dense. Many nights, when I tried to fall asleep, I'd be overcome by an intense feeling of dread that I couldn't place. I'd lie there, trying to pinpoint what might be causing it, but always came up empty. This was especially true whenever I stayed in the front bedroom, which one roommate had confided gave her nightmares. Looking back, I wish I'd known about EVPs at the time. I'm curious what they might have picked up in that house. Also, while I don't think there's a direct connection, it's worth mentioning that for much of this time, I worked in an old, supposedly haunted building on campus from the 1800s where I had a couple of paranormal experiences as well. I was born into a Mormon family, where ghosts and demons weren't really topics of conversation. In my religion, the belief is that spirits don't linger. They leave this world and move on. For most of my life, I believed that too, until my experience as a teenager changed everything. Even now, I can't talk about it with my family. They just say I was imagining things. But I know I wasn't the only one in the house who experienced it. Growing up as a military brat, I lived in so many places across states and countries that I became skeptical of the paranormal. But in my last 2 years of high school, we moved to Augusta, Georgia, where my dad was preparing to retire from the Army. For the first time, we decided to live off base, and when we looked at houses, I felt drawn to one in particular. It was like a dream. 4 bedrooms, an attic, and plenty of space. A rare find after all those cramped military houses. My mother and I were both mesmerized by it. First, everything was fine. We settled in, grateful for the room to breathe. But about 8 months in, my mom decided to repaint and change the carpets, not loving the dark colors the previous owners had left behind. That's when things began to change. It was spring break, and my parents threw a little get-together with some neighbors. We gathered in the second living room, where my dad played guitar and everyone sang along. I was sitting near the big window at the front of the house, just watching the street, when something caught my eye. Outside, I saw a dark, strange figure with what looked like wooden spikes. It didn't look human, and its form was distorted. I told my dad, who went out to check but found nothing. He shrugged it off, so I tried not to think about it. But later that night, after I'd fallen asleep in the living room, I felt this strange urge to wake up, like an internal alarm telling me to get up. I opened my eyes to an eerie silence. All the lights were off, and I heard soft footsteps coming from the dining room. No one else was downstairs, and I couldn't tell where the steps were coming from. Shaking it off, I went upstairs. A month went by, and I'd mostly forgotten about it. One night, while studying for finals, I heard my name called in a man's voice. Assuming it was my dad, I ignored it at first, but then it came again. I went downstairs to ask my mom what my dad wanted, but she said he wasn't home. He'd taken my brothers out with the dogs. She said I must have been studying too hard and needed a break, so I agreed and stayed downstairs for a while. The next night, I was looking for my notebook and couldn't find it anywhere. As I was standing in my room, retracing my steps, I felt the floor vibrate, as if someone was stepping heavily behind me. I turned, expecting to see someone, but there was no one. Then a cold breeze hit me, giving me goosebumps, and just as I was trying to make sense of it, my sister came in, holding my notebook. She'd found it downstairs. I told her what happened, but she just shrugged it off, though it still puzzles me to this day. Final exams were coming up, and I was stressing over graduation. I started staying up late studying, and my sister ended up sleeping downstairs because I kept the lights on. On the last night of studying, I felt something pressed down on the left side of my bed. I thought it was my sister telling me to hurry up, but when I looked, no one was there. I reached over to the indented part of the bed, and that's when I felt a strong push on my chest, knocking me backward. I'd never been so terrified in my life. I screamed, and my family came rushing in. My sister stood there, staring at me. "You saw him, didn't you?" she said. I had no idea what she was talking about. She then told me about a ghostly figure she'd captured in a photo on her digital camera. A sickly boy with sunken eyes and pale skin. She'd shown it to our mom, who made her delete it immediately. Something about that image was deeply wrong. My sister had wanted me to see it before it was erased, and I agreed it was best to delete it. After that night, I never felt alone in that house. My sister and I both slept with the lights on, a habit I still keep to this day whenever I visit. Every so often, I'd hear footsteps in the hall, or the faucet and toilet would turn on by themselves. My parents never believed us, insisting it was our imagination, but my sister understood. One night after finals, everyone had gone to bed, and I stayed up with a bowl of popcorn and a movie. About an hour in, I felt the room's temperature drop. I pulled my blanket up, thinking my leg must have slipped out, but when I checked, I was fully covered. That's when I felt it, a cold grip on my ankle. Suddenly, my leg was being lifted into the air. I started screaming, and my sister ran in, only to see my leg still suspended. Then, in front of her, I felt it pull me toward the edge of the bed. Both of us screamed as she grabbed a Bible and threw it at the air, desperate to do anything. The moment it hit the floor, my leg dropped, and I scrambled to the head of the bed, still crying and shaking. Our parents rushed in, but when I told them a ghost had grabbed me, they refused to believe it. My dad told me to stop rebelling, to read the scriptures, and to stop making things up. Even with my sister backing me up, he wouldn't hear of it. But that morning, I moved into my sister's room, and I never slept in my room again. From that point on, I went a little paranoid. I keep all the lights on, the TV running, the air conditioner blasting. My parents thought I was losing it and suggested therapy, but my sister defended me. After moving out of that room, I'd still hear footsteps at night, the unmistakable sounds of pacing, but I never felt the presence as strongly as I had in that room. Eventually, it became a storage space. No one wanted to sleep there. To this day, when I visit, I can't stay alone in that house. I don't know what it wanted, but I know it wasn't friendly. This is the first time I've ever shared this story, but the memory still chills me, even after all these years. One of my biggest regrets, even after 52 years, is selling my house at 1318 Smoky Road. It was spook central. But despite all that, I still dream about it. Even now, 15 years after moving, I find myself wandering from room to room in my dreams, as if I'm checking on the place. I never felt truly scared living there. When I sensed something strange or felt like I was being watched, I just shrug it off. But there was one time I think I was actually being punished. Jeff and I had been in a spat. I was being stubborn. No surprise there. And he'd gone to bed to pout while I stayed in my recliner, watching TV. Our bedroom was big enough to have a bed on one side and 2 recliners and a TV on the other, so technically, I was in the same room as him. After a while, I got up to grab a snack from the kitchen, but as I came back to sit down, I felt something grip my right index finger. It felt exactly like someone had bit down on it, hard. The pain was sharp, and I actually started to cry. Jeff jumped out of bed and rushed over to me, but there were no marks, and the pain faded after a few minutes. We ended up making up and going to bed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, had been trying to get my attention. In time, I became convinced it was Jeff's mother, Mary. I think she'd gotten angry with me for arguing with her son and wanted to send me a message. Well, she succeeded. One of my earliest memories in that house happened about a week before I moved in with Jeff. I'd stopped by with a dozen roses to surprise him. I had a key, so I placed the flowers and a sweet card on the kitchen table, knowing it'd be the first thing he'd see when he got home from work. But as soon as I walked in, I felt an unsettling heaviness in the air, so thick it made me uncomfortable. I quickly set down the flowers and left. Years later, I'd learned that feeling a heaviness in the air can be a sign of a ghostly presence. While I sometimes felt like I was being watched, I didn't experience that heavy air again until the day we moved out. That day, I went back one last time with my sons to clean up and grab a few final things. While the boys were playing in the back, I had this overwhelming sadness, like every inch of me was being pulled down. It was as though the whole house was mourning. I went from room to room saying goodbye, feeling this deep, inexplicable grief. It was one of the saddest days of my life. Even after moving, I couldn't shake my attachment to that house. I drive by every so often, park across the street, and just stare at it, wondering why I couldn't let it go. Then, I found out my sister Kelly had a gift. She could communicate with spirits. Curious, I asked her to come along on one of my visits to the house to see if she could help me understand why it had such a hold on me. But Kelly suggested it'd be best if she went alone, to get a clearer reading. Later that week, Kelly met me at the school where I worked, just up the road from the old house, appropriately named Smoky Road Middle School. She pulled me aside and told me, never go back to that house again. She explained that there was a lot of anger surrounding it. She sensed Mary's presence, but she wasn't just lingering. She was furious. She'd screamed at Kelly to leave and never return. Kelly said she'd hightailed it out of there, but before leaving, she sensed Jeff too, and described him as being deeply sad. Now I felt guilty for selling the house, but there was nothing I could do. It was too late. The house was eventually torn down, but even now, it lives on in my dreams, and I've always told myself that if I ever come into a lot of money, I'd build a replica and spend the rest of my days there. Years passed, and one day, I ran into the son of the man who bought the property from me. He wasted no time, saying, "Hey Cheryl, you know that old house you sold to Dad? Did you know it's haunted?" I told him I knew a little about it and asked him to tell me what he'd experienced. He explained that his dad had been at the house salvaging wood from the kitchen, pulling nails out to reuse the boards. The son had gone to the store and left his dad there alone for a few minutes. When he returned, he found his dad sitting in the truck, pale as a ghost. His dad explained that while he was working, he heard a knock on the kitchen screen door, causing it to open a bit. He went over, shut it, and went back to his work, thinking nothing of it. But the knock came again, and again the door opened. This time, he jammed some vines around the door to hold it closed. But then the knocking started again, even harder, causing the top of the door to rattle. The knocks grew louder and louder, until finally, the door broke free from the vines and slammed open. That's when he ran out, and he swore he'd never go back in that house again. A few weeks later, I bumped into his dad, and the first thing he said was, "Hey, your old house is haunted." We laughed, and I listened to the story all over again. To this day, I feel that house calling to me in my dreams. There's something about it that won't let go, and sometimes, I wonder if it'll ever truly rest. This was the first time anyone besides myself ever witnessed a ghost in our 1860s stone house. Like any old farmhouse, ours has one way up and one way down. To get to my sister's room, you have to climb the stairs, go through the upstairs living room, pass through my room, and then you'll find her doorway. Her light switch is actually in my room, next to my closet. The ceilings arch with the roof, and my floor has a second level beneath it, so footsteps echo more loudly, making every step seem heavier. We've always joked that someone could easily crawl beneath the floor, where the rafters were once open to the downstairs rooms. My sister and I had tried countless times to convince our parents that our house was haunted, but they never took us seriously. Even when we'd all be sitting in the living room and hear the unmistakable sound of furniture being dragged across the floor upstairs, my parents would just smile and tease us about the ghost. Our pets sensed it too. We had one cat and one dog inside the house, and they'd often wake up from a nap, staring intently into the dining room as if watching something invisible. Once, when my sister and I were home alone, our dog, Sassy, woke from a nap, snarling, with her fur bristling as she stared into the dining room. We were both freaked out, but when we finally worked up the courage to turn on the light, there was nothing there. And then there was this one night, the reason I can't sit through any of those paranormal activity movies. I know they're fiction, but the sounds and events in them remind me a little too much of what we experienced that night. Have you ever had a sleep so deep that, upon waking, you're momentarily disoriented, trying to figure out if it's night or morning, and where you are? That's how I felt that night. It was a school night, and since I was the youngest, my bedtime was 9 p.m. My sister would usually stay up in her room until around 11 p.m. with her door closed, so her light shining from under her door always acted as a comforting nightlight. But on this night, her door was open, and I drifted off to sleep. Suddenly, I jolted awake to the sound of someone running through my room and a door slamming shut. Groggy, I assumed it was just my sister stomping through, upset about something, and slamming her door. But I was wrong. Moments later, my sister started screaming bloody murder, begging me to turn on her light and open her door. Half asleep and annoyed, I yelled back, "No, you shut it, you open it." But she kept screaming, her voice full of panic, insisting that I open the door. Reluctantly, I got up, flipped on the light, and swung her door open, giving her a look of annoyance. But what I saw stopped me cold. My sister was pressed as far back against her headboard as she could get, her face pale as a ghost, clutching the covers up to her chest. I asked her what had happened, and she whispered. When the door slammed shut, I woke up and saw a black figure slowly walking across my room, heading to the foot of my bed. But when you turned on the light, it vanished. She didn't waste a second. Gathering her pillows, covers, and clothes for the next day, she walked straight toward the stairs. I asked her where she was going, and she replied, "No way am I staying up here after that. Good luck." Without hesitation, I grabbed my things and followed her downstairs. Anyone who works in the medical field knows the old sayings. Open a window when a patient passes, or how they come in threes. With my background, I tend to brush off strange little incidents, telling myself it's all in my head. One night at work, it was just two aides, a med tech, and myself, the nurse, on the back halls. This was the new wing, so you'd think there wouldn't be any spirits lurking around. But we were about to be proven wrong. Around 7:30 p.m., I began my med pass. As I went to each room, I made sure to keep my cart against the wall so everyone could get through, and I positioned it so I could see down the hall from the corner of my eye. I went into room 228, gave the meds, came out, threw away my gloves, and started preparing for the next patient, when I noticed someone standing at the far end of the hall in a doorway. I paused, looked up, but saw no one there. I continued my rounds, closing each door behind me as I left. Yet again, I caught sight of a figure in that same doorway at the end of the hall. I turned, but still no one was there. With only a few rooms left to go, I found myself inching closer to that spot where I kept seeing someone. When I reached the last room, I went in, did my routine, and came out to my cart, only to notice that the door of the previous room was now open. Knowing the history of the patient and knowing I was alone down the hall, it threw me for a moment. I simply closed the door and moved on. Finally, I entered my last room. But when I came out, I found the same door open again, the same room where I'd been seeing that figure standing in the doorway at the end of the hall. Deciding to play nice, I left it open and headed back toward the nurse's station to start my charting. It was now about 12:30 a.m. All the patients were asleep, the halls were dark, and my teammates were sitting in the living space, chatting. It was quiet, something no nurse wants to hear during their shift. From my spot at the station, I could see down both 2A and the newer courtyard wing. I was just about finished with my charting when I started hearing footsteps coming from courtyard. I glanced up, thinking maybe one of the patients was wandering the hall, but no one was there. I went back to my charting, and then I heard footsteps again, louder this time, as if someone were shuffling around. Since we have a few patients who like to wander, I got up, let my coworkers know I was going to check, and headed down the hall. I stopped outside each room, pausing and listening before taking a few more steps toward the end of the hall. Of course, I was getting closer to that one room, the one where I kept seeing the figure in the doorway. I thought to myself, great, just my luck. As I raised my arm to switch on the light, a loud crash came from inside the room. I bolted down the hall, not daring to look back. My coworkers looked at me wide-eyed as I gasped for breath, trying to explain what had just happened. None of them wanted to check the room either, but finally we all went together. And to our surprise, everything in the room was in perfect order. Nothing on the floor, nothing misplaced, no one there. The creepy part? A patient had stayed in that exact room for about 2 months, and a few days earlier, they'd been discharged, healthy, and ready to go home. That morning, during shift change, we got a phone call. The patient who'd been in that room had fallen early that morning and passed away from a severe brain hemorrhage. In 2007, my partner and I moved into an older home just outside the historic district of Gainesville, Georgia. It was modest but had a unique charm, perfect for our first house together. The house had only 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom, typical for the neighborhood and time period it was built. The kitchen was small but endearing, with a deep wash sink and vintage-style cabinets. The living and dining areas adjoined to make up one side of an L shape, with the 2 bedrooms and bathroom on the other side. There was even a basement under half the house, complete with a fireplace that shared a chimney with the one upstairs in the living room. Our encounters with the lady, as we came to call her, began on the very first day we moved in, though we didn't realize it fully at the time. After our last trip from the neighboring town, we finished unloading the moving truck and left a pile of bungee ties by the driveway, planning to put them away soon. We closed up the truck, went inside to put things away, then left to return the rental truck and grab a few more items from our old house. When we arrived at the old house and opened the door, we were shocked to see the bungee ties lying inside, just on the floor by the entrance. We thought we must have somehow left them behind without noticing. But when we returned to our new home, the ties were no longer by the driveway. Somehow they'd ended up back in our old house. Not long after we settled in, I began noticing little things out of place. At first, I brushed it off, but then I'd see our pets, the cat and the dogs, watching something unseen move across the room. They'd all track it at the same time, their heads moving in unison. And then I began to see it too. I'd be sitting at the piano, and out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch a shadowy figure, as if standing there listening. I wasn't frightened, but the presence felt real, like someone else was there. My mother came for a visit, and I told her about what I was experiencing. She said she sensed a feminine, nurturing energy in the house. Another evening, when my uncle was visiting, he even mentioned seeing a woman walking slowly down the hallway toward the bedroom. But there was no other woman in the house, just us. One night, my dog had a seizure, and we had to rush him to the emergency vet. My mother came to stay the night, and we kept a close watch on the dog. She slept in my bed, and I lay beside her, wide awake, thinking about everything that had happened. Suddenly, I saw the shadowy figure drift into the room, moving toward my mother's side of the bed and just staying there, as if watching her. I thought my mother was asleep, so I whispered, "Mother, mother." She quietly replied, "I see her." And then, just like that, the lady disappeared. From then on, little things continued to happen. The washing machine would sometimes run a full cycle with no clothes in it. The basement lights would switch on or off without explanation. The latch on the basement door would mysteriously lock or unlock. The exercise pen for the dogs would be opened when no one was home, and we'd find the dogs roaming free in the basement. We even added snaps to the latches, only to come home and find the snaps moved to another part of the pen. I don't think she liked the dogs being confined, and the dogs adored her. One day after work, I took my work keys from my scrubs and placed them on a shelf outside the bathroom, right in front of a large bottle of lavender oil. The next morning, they were gone. We searched everywhere for almost 2 weeks, as the keys were important. But one morning, as I was getting ready, I opened the cabinet, and there they were in front of the lavender oil, just as I had left them. Yet we checked that spot every day for 2 weeks. We lived in that house for 3 years, moving only because of the costs of maintaining an older home. But I miss the lady. I miss her antics and her quiet presence, her love for music and animals, her gentle sense of humor. She was as much a part of that home as we were, and I'll always carry the memory of her with me. When I was 7 years old, one morning, like any other weekday, I was awoken by the sound of my parents having breakfast. I lay in bed as my father came to say goodbye to me before work, but being a silly kid, I pretended to be asleep and didn't respond. I wish I hadn't. On his way to work that morning, my father was killed by a drunk driver, and I never saw him again. Life as I knew it changed forever. The days after his sudden death were a blur. My mother was arranging the funeral with my grandmother, and people came by constantly to offer condolences. It was a whirlwind of emotions. Eventually, things quieted down after the funeral, but that's when stories of contact began to surface among family members. The first story I heard came from my maternal grandfather. My mother and I had moved in with my grandmother while she figured out what to do with my father's belongings, and my grandfather was staying in our old house, making sure it wouldn't be left empty. He told me later that he was watching TV, my father's favorite sport, and sitting in my father's favorite chair when he suddenly felt a surge of emotion and began to cry. At that exact moment, he said, all the windows in the house started rattling, as if someone were knocking on each one at the same time. It was a small, single-story home, and every single window shook at once. My grandfather said he called out, "Yes, I know, you're here." And just like that, the noise stopped. He wasn't afraid, only comforted. He knew it was my father letting him know he was there. The next story came from my great-aunt. She'd asked my mother if she could keep one of my father's sweaters, and on a particularly chilly morning, she put it on and went about cooking breakfast. She told us she was alone in the kitchen when she suddenly felt a tug on the sweater and heard my father's voice, right by her ear, say, "Hello, Auntie." She was startled, but she wasn't afraid. She knew it was him. Of everyone in the family, my mother had the most experiences with my father's presence, which didn't surprise me. A week before he died, she told me she had a vivid dream of him dying in an accident. She debated telling him but decided against it when he mentioned that he dreamt of his own father, who had passed away years before. Their dreams had unsettled her, and she couldn't bring herself to tell him. After his death, she told me she would often lie in bed at night and feel a familiar pressure as if someone was sitting on the bed beside her. then lying down next to her. She knew it was him and felt comforted, not scared. She had many dreams of him, but one that she told me about stands out most vividly. In the dream, she was walking down a crowded street, and my father appeared, emerging from the crowd. He'd reach for her hand and say, "Come with me." She would resist, telling him, "No, I can't, you're dead." And then she'd wake up. Years went by, and while family members continued to have experiences, I never did. By the time I was 19, it started to weigh on me. Why, as his daughter, hadn't he reached out to me? Even my cousins, who'd moved into our old home after my mother decided it was too painful to live there, had seen him or heard his voice. I couldn't understand why I hadn't had any sign from him. One day, I was in the shower, and I started thinking about my father. For the first time, I felt a surge of frustration and anger over the lack of contact. In my mind, I silently challenged him, "I'm your daughter. Do something." And right at that moment, a part of the shower curtain suddenly pushed inward, as if someone had punched it from the other side. I froze. Both doors were closed, the window was shut. There was no draft or explanation. Only that one spot in the middle had moved quickly, and then it was still. Peeked out, but no one was there. I won't lie, it scared me, but I also felt a deep happiness. I had finally made contact. Now, I'm 32, and this year marks the 25th anniversary of my father's passing. I haven't had any other experiences since that day. But here's an interesting detail. When my husband and I first started dating, I told him about my dad, and he asked when in November he had passed. I said, "November 28th. He looked at me, surprised, and said, "November 28th is my father's birthday." Such is life, I suppose. My wife and I were vacationing at my parents' cabin in the North Georgia mountains one weekend, and we had quite an experience. Both of us have had mild brushes with the paranormal before, but this was by far the most terrified either of us has ever been. This event took place 2 years ago before we were married. We arrived early in the afternoon, an unusual time for us, as we both typically work days and usually arrive late Friday night, staying for the weekend. But that day we'd managed to get there early. Once inside and settled, we began arguing almost immediately, about nothing in particular, just going at it tooth and nail. It was around 4 p.m., maybe a bit later, when I started experiencing violent images that seemed to pop into my head from nowhere. I'm not a violent person, but these images showed me killing my girlfriend, or someone else I knew, in brutal ways. These flashes kept coming, every 30 minutes or so, and became so disturbing that I eventually asked my girlfriend if we could just go to bed early and leave in the morning. The weekend felt unsalvageable, and honestly, I thought we might even break up once we got back to Atlanta. She agreed, also feeling worn out from the relentless fighting. We made sure to clean up everything before bed so we could leave quickly the next morning. Closing up doors and drawers, putting away dishes, tossing out empty cans. Then we turned in, exhausted. I was just about to drift off when I felt my girlfriend tense up beside me. I raised my head and asked what was wrong. She said she'd heard the guest room door open and then close. I told her it was probably just the house creaking and lay back down. But then we both heard it. The loud creak of the 2 floorboards in front of our bedroom door, boards that only creak when someone steps on them. Realizing that couldn't happen on its own, I shot out of bed, grabbed my pistol and flung open the door, expecting an intruder. But there was no one there. Then, I noticed the entertainment center was wide open. The TV was on, and the drawers in the side of the unit were open, arranged in a stair-step pattern going downward. The middle drawer of the side table, where we kept phone books for the landline, was also open. I walked into the kitchen, and every cabinet, along with the fridge, freezer, and dishwasher, was wide open too. I called to my girlfriend, telling her to help me clean up because we were leaving. It took us about 10 minutes to get the place closed up again and grab our bags. Both of us were terrified and ready to get out. I had the keys, so I locked the door, and as soon as I heard the lock click, a deafening roar filled the air. I instinctively covered my ears. The only way I can describe the sound is half mountain cat, half inhuman shriek. Needless to say, I bolted for the car. I backed up the curvy gravel driveway at 20 miles per hour, miraculously avoiding a wreck, and sped down the mountain road that connects my parents' cabin to the main road. My girlfriend started screaming that I was going to kill us, and I finally slowed down when we hit the blacktop. It was about 30 minutes later on the main highway when she asked me what had me so spooked. She hadn't heard the roar at all. That experience stayed with us, and months later, another eerie event happened that left us wondering if it was related to what we'd encountered at the cabin. We were pet-sitting my parents' cats while they were in New York for New Year's. We got there late one night because we'd been busy all afternoon. Everything was normal until we went downstairs, where there's a den, a storage room that leads to the basement, and a bathroom. When I looked into the dark storage room, I could make out a darker figure sitting on the computer desk. It was a dense shadow with glowing yellow eyes, watching us. I didn't get a good feeling from it. My wife saw it too, and we both quickly went back upstairs. To this day, we're still not sure what we encountered. Was it the same spirit from the cabin, or a different entity altogether? Whatever it was, neither encounter left us feeling safe. Any insights or similar experiences would be much appreciated. Last year, I moved into a new house, and within the first week, I started hearing footsteps when I was home alone. My roommate and my boyfriend thought I was crazy. They even told me so. But the footsteps became more frequent, always coming from the empty room above mine, a space we hadn't found a reason to use. Not long after moving in, my boyfriend and I broke up, and he left, leaving me and my roommate with the house. A few weeks went by, and one night I came home late to find my roommate sitting in the garage, looking frazzled as he smoked a cigarette. When he saw me, he said, "You're not crazy." I gave him a confused look, and he explained what had happened. He'd been in his upstairs bathroom when he heard footsteps in the hallway and a strange fluttering sound. It had scared him so badly that he ran outside and waited for me to get home. To give you a sense of the layout, when you enter the front door, you step into the living room, where we keep my dog's crate right inside the doorway. To the left is the staircase, and straight ahead is a small doorway leading to the kitchen. To the left of the kitchen is a short hallway that branches off. My bedroom is to the left and a half bath to the right. A few weeks later, I brought a date home. As we walked from my bedroom to let my dog in from the backyard, I passed the living room when something caught my eye. My brain registered movement in the dog's crate, so I stepped back, expecting to see my dog inside. But the crate was empty. I couldn't look away because I was certain I'd seen something. Then my date, who was behind me, said, "You saw that too, didn't you?" It was unnerving. I might have chalked it up to my imagination if he hadn't seen it too. After that, the footsteps never stopped. One night, my roommate and I were outside talking when we heard a piercing shriek. I stood up, saying, "That sounds like a bat," and my roommate agreed. It was loud, like it was trapped somewhere. At the same time, my dog started barking at what I assumed was nothing. I moved to the edge of the deck to get a better look at the side yard, and what I saw stopped me in my tracks. In the middle of the yard was a faint, white flutter, like a bird with a broken wing trying to take flight. I watched it for a split second before a car passed by, and it disappeared into the headlights. As soon as the car went by, the bat and my dog fell silent. The footsteps, however, never stopped. Weeks went by, and as Halloween approached, the strange sounds faded a bit. I only heard the footsteps once a week or so, and things felt peaceful. But a week or two before the party, my roommate met me for dinner after work, and he went to Goodwill afterward while I went home. The first thing I did when I got home was go to the bathroom to change out of my work clothes. While I was in there with the bathroom door shut, I heard whistling right outside the door. It was so close, I froze in panic. After a minute of trying to rationalize it, I assumed it was my roommate. But when I opened the bathroom door, no one was there. I crept through my bedroom and opened the door to the hallway, but the house was empty. I went to the garage to check if my roommate's car was there, and it wasn't. I was definitely home alone. By now, I was pretty freaked out, but I tried to brush it off and started setting up Halloween decorations. When my roommate got home, he told me he couldn't whistle, which only added to the mystery. Later that night, I went out to the back deck for a smoke when I heard the whistling again, this time directly behind me. I whipped around, but no one was there. That's when I felt certain that whatever it was had moved into my room and taken up permanent residence. My nephew came over recently, and he's heard the footsteps too. Just last Saturday, he ran into the garage and asked me if I'd just been in the house. I told him no and asked why, and he said he'd heard someone walking around. A few weeks back, I adopted a kitten and set up his litter box in my bathroom with his food and water bowls in my bedroom. When I'm sleeping or away, I keep him locked in there. The first night, he paced around the room, staring up at the ceiling, especially in two spots: the corner near my bathroom door and the side of the bed I sleep on. Last Saturday, he lay on my side of the bed, fixated on the ceiling, not moving even when I entered the room. I went to brush my teeth, and he still didn't budge. It wasn't until I left the room that he finally moved to follow me. My nephew later told me that when he went to dry his hair in my room, he'd seen the cat in that same spot, staring up at the ceiling. Yesterday, I realized that my room is always the coldest in the house, usually about 3 to 5 degrees colder than anywhere else. Could be because of clogged vents, or maybe the spirit really does live in my bedroom. Either way, it's noticeably chilly. So here's my concern. I know spirits sometimes attach themselves to places, objects, or even people. This house is in Winder, Georgia, an area with a rich history, and I know the land itself might hold something. But if it's attached to me, could it follow me when I move next month? Part of me feels I might actually miss him, but I don't know if I want him tagging along to the next place. What are the chances he might come with me? This happened just last night, right around 3 a.m. My bedroom is just down a short hallway from the front foyer of our suburban home, which is in a quiet neighborhood outside Atlanta. We have 2 outdoor lights that stay on all night, brightening up our foyer more than I'd like. But with glass doors, I feel it's necessary for security. For the past year, my husband has been sleeping in the back of the house, in his recliner. He says it's the only place he can get comfortable since his hip replacement surgery, so we've adjusted, even joked about how we're getting old. Last night, I went to bed around midnight and fell into a deep sleep, dreaming about my college town. In the middle of my dream, I became vaguely aware of a tapping sensation on my right calf. I was sleeping on my left side under plenty of covers, so the taps weren't light. As I started to wake, I couldn't tell if it was part of my dream or the start of a Charlie horse. I had one recently and was worried my mind was preparing for another. I then noticed my right hand was asleep, and a nagging thought crossed my mind. Was my heart rate too low? I'd been diagnosed and treated for AFib last October, possibly a side effect of COVID, and although things had returned to normal, I still monitored my heart rate, especially at night. Standing up beside my bed, I was still processing the steady tap, tap, tap that had woken me. My husky border collie mix was right at my feet, still sound asleep. Just then, I caught a bright flash of light in my peripheral vision, near the foyer. It was quick and intense, coming from the direction of our front windows. My mind started racing, and strangely enough, I thought about people mentioning flashes of light as a sign of angels. I walked out to the foyer, turning left into our living room, which is lined with high and low windows facing the street. But there was no sound outside, and no sign of headlights, very unusual at 3 a.m. on a Monday. Maybe my husband had gone to the bathroom next to our room without me hearing, turning the light on and shutting the door. But as I walked further, I found him fast asleep, snoring quietly from his recliner, a good 60 feet and 3 rooms away from where I'd been. The house was silent, the other dogs sound asleep too. I went back to my room, finally checked the time, 3:03 a.m. I was shivering more than usual, though it had been a cold night. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, wanted me awake. Was there a message, a nudge to get my heart rate up? Well, it certainly worked. Years ago, just after my mother passed, I once felt a light touch on my hand while sleeping. But this felt different, a bit more forceful yet gentle, as if someone was trying to get my attention. Oddly, I don't feel unsettled, more protected. But the flash, I'd love to understand what it meant. One more thing. Before bed, I said my usual prayer, thanking God and asking for health and protection for my family. This time, I added, protect this house. I wonder, am I watching too many unexplained videos? Reading too many stories? Perhaps. But who's to say what's too much? I've experienced the supernatural throughout my life, but this recent incident is one I haven't shared. I'm usually a private person, but after reading so many of your stories, I feel it's only fair to offer mine in return. This isn't a dramatic tale, just the facts as I've experienced them. It all started shortly after I went through a tough divorce. I moved into a family-owned house, a place I could afford, which was a relief given how high living costs are in Hawaii. Almost immediately, strange things began happening. In my first week there, I was in the kitchen singing along to a Billy Idol song when I heard a voice say, "Shoo. Quiet. Undersurf." The people. I didn't catch the last part as I had a DVD playing in the living room, and at first I thought it was from that. But when I rewound it, there was nothing even close to those words. That's when I started to feel uneasy in the house. A week later, I was on the phone outside when I heard a rough, close breath in my ear. Startled, I rushed back to the lighted area of the yard. A few days after that, I heard the same breath while I was in the kitchen. It was raspy, long, and very deliberate, as though it wanted to make itself known. The disturbances moved to my bedroom after that. These things would happen when I was lying in bed, awake but not fully alert. I'd feel the covers being tugged, or a force kick the mattress near my head. There have even been times I've been poked in, well, uncomfortable areas. The eeriest part is the voices. This thing, whatever it is, can mimic the voices of my mom and my aunties. I'll hear my name being called softly in what sounds like their voices, but only when I'm alone. I've also seen shapes and shadows around the house, sometimes just at the edge of my vision. I often see impressions of spirits in my room, a sense I've had since I was young. One night, I glimpsed a woman with dark hair standing in the hallway, and on another occasion, I saw a blue man approaching me, only for him to disappear before I could make out his features. And then there are the sounds. I often hear knocking in the kitchen, random and frequent, day or night. It's unnerving, but I've gotten used to it, mostly. Eventually, I decided I needed help, so we contacted a man reputed to be spiritually powerful. As we talked over the phone, the line filled with static, and he said it was the entity trying to block the conversation. He told me he sensed there were many old burials nearby, perhaps from ancient Hawaiian times. He instructed me to get some frankincense oil for a blessing and, over the phone, blessed the oil and had me anoint myself with it. He prayed with me and assured me things would improve. That night, however, things took a strange turn. It was around midnight and I was outside smoking a cigarette. Living on a mountain, it gets dark and eerie out there, but I've never felt quite like this. I suddenly heard my mom's voice calling my name from the shadows. The voice was perfect, unmistakable, and it terrified me. I bolted inside and locked the door. It sounds silly, but at that moment, I felt I needed every barrier possible between me and that voice. I was told later that sometimes things get worse before they get better after a blessing. And now, something even stranger has started. There's this whooshing sound, like a rush of air, that seems to follow me. I've heard it twice now, and I can't shake the feeling that it's somehow connected to all of this. I don't know what the future holds in this house, and honestly, it's hard to feel truly comfortable here. I just hope that eventually, I can feel at ease in my own space because, for now, this is the only home I have. It's been a while since I last shared anything here. Life has kept me busy, especially since the arrival of my daughter, Nanny. She's truly a joy, and watching her grow has been a special journey. Strangely, she's starting to resemble the little girl I once saw in a dream before she was even born. It feels as if she's always been a part of our lives, as if she's been with us from the start. Nanny was born in the fall, and even before bringing her home, my wife and I had some concerns about our house, which has always had a strange energy. We often prayed that my late mother would look over our baby, hoping that any spirit in the house would be peaceful. But soon after Nanny came home, things started happening. At just 2 weeks old, Nanny would sleep in a bassinet next to our bed. One night around 4 in the morning, my wife jolted awake and started calling my name, visibly alarmed. She grabbed Nanny and was rocking her. I asked her what was wrong, and she said, Someone was talking to the baby. Oddly enough, I had thought I heard a faint voice just before my wife got up, but I brushed it off as a half-dream. After that, we brought Nanny into bed with us for the rest of the night. A month passed, and we began to think maybe it was a one-time visit. Then, one morning while we were in bed, I was lying there half awake when I heard a child's voice, clear as day, say, "Hello." It startled me, and at the same moment, my wife jumped out of bed, grabbed Nanny and said, "There! Did you hear it that time?" We ended up bringing Nanny into our bed again, and she's been sleeping with us ever since. My wife is convinced it was the voice of a young boy. A friend suggested we set up a digital voice recorder, DVR, at night to capture any unusual sounds. So, on a particularly active night, I decided to give it a try. Baby Nanny was teething, and it was a rough night with her waking up several times. The next day, I took the DVR to work to listen back, and what I found was astonishing. Throughout the night, I heard odd bumps and faint conversations that neither of us could remember. At one point, Nanny had woken up crying, and as my wife went to the bathroom, I rolled over to comfort her. On the DVR, however, I heard something more. A woman's voice could be heard softly humming, as if trying to soothe Nanny back to sleep. I was stunned because I hadn't heard it at all when it happened. Later on the recording, there was the unmistakable sound of my acoustic guitar being plucked. It felt like someone or something was there with us. Curious, I spoke to a psychic for some insight. She asked me if I had 2 children. I told her no, just 1 daughter. Then she asked if I'd ever had a miscarriage, explaining that she was seeing 2 children connected to my wife, a young boy and our daughter. She described the boy as about 3 years old. My wife and I hadn't experienced any loss, and we were together since high school, so her vision left me with more questions than answers. During the day, my father helps watch Nanny, and he started noticing things too, even though we hadn't told him about the strange happenings. He said he often heard someone talking to her when she was alone. I decided to set up the DVR during the day, and sure enough, I captured something unsettling. On the recording, I heard Nanny starting to cry as I left the room. She stopped suddenly, then let out a loud wail. But before that, a boy's voice could be heard saying, "Be nice to me." Hearing the voice gave me chills. It was the same voice my wife and I had heard that early morning. It's like Nanny has drawn these spirits to her even at this young age. We always knew she'd have her own encounters someday, especially given what my wife and I have experienced over the years. But we never thought it would happen this early in her life. These are just a few of the strange events we've had since Nanny came into our lives, and we're learning to navigate it together as a family. Since childhood, strange experiences have followed me. It started back when we lived on the Marine Corps base in Oahu, Hawaii. I was in 3rd grade, and our house was directly behind an elementary school, which was rumored to be built over an old burial ground. While I didn't know whether to believe it, everyone at school knew the stories, and no one went to the bathroom alone. One night, about a week after moving in, I had a vivid dream of a girl with dark hair in a long blue dress. She was running across a field, chased by a man in dark pants and a white shirt. She made it to a house with wooden steps, but he grabbed her and she fell, hitting her head on the steps. In the dream, I saw her heart-shaped locket fall through the cracks, lying in the dirt below. I had this dream repeatedly, and I'd often wake up crying, feeling a strong sadness for her. Around that same time, things started happening at school. One day, I went alone to the bathroom, something no one usually did. I immediately felt like someone was watching me. When I was in the stall, the walls started shaking. Scared, I ran out. Later, I noticed writing on the stall door that read, "Tia, find it," felt directed at me. I went to the principal, but she laughed it off, which left me feeling even more uneasy. At home, strange things continued. Once, I was up reading late, and my lamp started flickering, and my bed began to shake slightly. I ran out of my room, and while standing in the hallway, I felt as though something was coming up the stairs toward me. Another night, I woke up feeling watched and looked toward my door. There, I saw a dark-haired girl in a white dress standing in the doorway. She looked around my age. I started to believe this might be the girl from my dreams and even felt certain her name was Abigail. Years later, after moving to California, the strange experiences didn't stop. When my sister and I shared a room, I once heard what sounded like someone rubbing their hands together on the lower bunk. But when I looked down, no one was there, and I found my whole family downstairs. In my own room later, I once saw the shadow of a girl again. It seemed like Abigail had followed me. The events grew darker as I got older. Once, while coming up the stairs, I felt a strong grip on my ankle, tripping me. Then I heard footsteps coming up behind me. I ran to my room, terrified. Another night, I woke up to a whisper right in my ear saying, "I'll kill you." It felt so real that it still chills me to think about it. Since then, these experiences have occasionally continued. In college, I had an encounter where I heard fast footsteps behind me in the hallway, but when I looked, no one was there. Another time, I woke up shivering and struggling to breathe, only to learn the next day that my dog had passed. I also had a strange feeling before another pet died. 2 different psychics have told me that I might have a sensitivity to spirits, maybe even a form of empathy. While it's unsettling, I can't ignore how often these things happen to me. I don't know why, but it seems these experiences are tied to me in some way. In my bedroom, I had an old goat's head mounted above my bed. I've always been a nature enthusiast and enjoyed hunting, so I thought it was a fitting decoration. It had been hanging there for a while without any issue, until one strange week in the spring. One night I had an unusual dream. In the dream I was in my room and I noticed some kind of creature, something like a small dog or ferret, living inside the goat's head. It seemed playful and harmless, so I remember enjoying the dream and playing with the creature. When I woke up, I brushed it off as just another strange dream, and I didn't think much more about it. Later that same week, while in the bathroom, I saw the shadow of a tall figure, about 6 or 7 feet, standing there. The light was on, so the room was fully lit, but this shadow stayed for a few seconds before disappearing. I was startled, but I'd seen shadow figures before and tried not to dwell on it. That night, I prayed for protection and asked for the shadow to leave and not return. That same night, something very odd happened. I was lying in bed, directly below the goat's head, when I felt a small feather land on my chest. I assumed it was from my pet myna bird, who often perched on the head above me. Smiling, I looked up, expecting to see my bird preening. Instead, I saw the goat's head shaking as if someone were gripping it and shaking it back and forth. I froze. The shaking was strong enough to dislodge my bird's feather, so I knew I wasn't imagining things. I touched the wall behind the head and felt vibrations confirming that it was really shaking. After about 20 or 30 seconds, the movement stopped. I was so unnerved that I called my dog over and just lay there with him until I eventually fell asleep. The next morning, I told my dad about both the shadow figure and the shaking head. He seemed surprised and told me he'd also been experiencing strange things around the house recently. His first experience was especially unsettling. He was lying on the sofa watching TV when he suddenly felt the weight of something jump onto the sofa beside him. He thought it was one of our cats at first, but then he sensed a strong, evil presence. He found he couldn't move for several seconds, but he was fully awake, so it couldn't have been sleep paralysis. After those few seconds, he could move again, and he immediately grabbed his Bible and began reading, asking whatever it was to leave. The second experience he mentioned was less frightening. He'd been sitting on the bed when he felt something enter his body, filling him with a tingling sensation. This time, it felt more uplifting than threatening, though it still scared him. After this, we both felt as though there was a heavy energy lingering in the house. Over the next few days, I saw more shadow figures, and each one left me feeling uneasy. Finally, I realized that there might be a connection between my dream and the goat's head. I started to think that the head was either a portal for spirits or had become a resting place for something supernatural. Given that both good and negative energies seemed to be present, I figured it was more likely that the head had become a gateway of sorts. Without hesitation, my dad and I decided to take down the goat's head. We put it in a box and moved it to our outdoor storage unit. Then we smudged the house with sage and prayed, asking for any spirits to leave our home. My dad admitted afterward that he'd been getting bad vibes from the goat's head lately, especially whenever he looked into its glass eyes. Once we removed the head, the strange occurrences stopped almost completely. Occasionally, we'll still feel a passing sense of unease, but nothing as intense as that one week. So, what do you think? Was the goat's head somehow a gateway for spirits? Or did a wandering spirit just find it a convenient place to inhabit? And do you think my dream was connected to everything that happened? Your grandmother's traditions, from your Portuguese grandmother's upside-down broom ritual to ward off feitiças, witches, to your Hawaiian grandmother's warnings about Kepaloa and not performing certain activities at night, were always meant to protect you from the supernatural. Despite these precautions, it seems you have often found yourself in close proximity to unsettling and unexplainable encounters. One of the earliest incidents was while staying at a friend's house in Paolo. You woke up around 2:30 a.m. to see a dark, cloaked figure standing close to you, its face nearly touching yours. Your scream brought your friend's husband rushing into the room, but you were so embarrassed that you brushed it off as a bad dream. The next morning, when you tried to bring it up, your friend's husband silenced you abruptly, hinting that he had perhaps encountered this figure himself and didn't want to confront it. Living in Waianae, you became familiar with the notorious choking ghost, an entity known to pin people down in their sleep. This ghost has come to you multiple times. You could always sense its presence before it arrived, feeling its oppressive energy as it would suddenly pin you down, making it impossible to move or scream. This experience, it seems, is more common than you might think, as many locals share similar stories, all eerily alike in their details. The most disturbing encounters, however, have occurred recently in a house in Aiea, where you work the night shift as a caregiver for an elderly woman with dementia. Around 2:30 to 3:30 a.m., the house fills with unsettling noises. The patient's daughter reassured you it was due to the house's age, but you had your doubts. One particular night, you felt an intense hunger and decided to grab a quick snack in the kitchen. But as soon as you finished, you heard heavy footsteps racing across the roof, stopping directly above you. Shaken, you locked yourself in the patient's room and texted a coworker, who jokingly dismissed it as probably cats. Though the loud, intense sound felt more like a predator than a pet, things began to escalate. In addition to creaking walls, you experienced a fire alarm blaring without reason, a doorbell ringing to an empty doorstep, and a TV shutting off by itself. One coworker even woke to find the TV on a different channel than where she left it. Recently, these encounters have grown more physical and unnerving. A new caregiver fell asleep on the couch and awoke to a sensation like an electric shock, yet found no electrical outlets nearby. Later that night, she felt an invisible force pulling at her feet, as though trying to drag her off the couch. Leaving her so terrified she ran to the patient's room, unwilling to go back to sleep. Another new caregiver experienced something similar. Her husband, who had accompanied her for support, came to her, visibly upset, saying he had called for her when something pinned him down, but she didn't respond. She hadn't heard anything and chalked it up to a nightmare, but the fear in his voice indicated he thought otherwise. Then came an incident that was even harder to dismiss. One of the new caregivers, after her shift, drove home as usual. But as she pulled into her garage, she noticed something deeply unsettling. There was no key in the ignition. She found her keys still in her bag, yet she had driven the whole way without them. Her husband attempted to reason it out, suggesting a mechanical issue, but even he couldn't replicate the situation when he tried pulling the keys out of the ignition himself. Tonight, the atmosphere feels more intense, more threatening than usual, as if the spirit is no longer content with simply scaring you all. What began as harmless pranks has evolved into something potentially sinister, as if the entity is growing in power or intent. Your story reveals a chilling escalation, a shift from simple scare tactics to targeted, tangible actions. It seems your instinct is right. This prankster spirit may want more than just a frightened reaction. Your visit to the museum on Oahu sounds like it turned out to be more than just an educational outing. It became a deeply personal and even spiritual experience. Arriving early in the cool morning air with a group of excited classmates, you were all set to explore the various exhibits. As you moved through the galleries, each piece seemed to hold its own story, revealing glimpses into the artist's world. But something changed as you entered the Islander Gallery. What started as a pleasant exploration took on an unsettling feeling as you ventured further to the back. A wave of nausea and dizziness crept over you, and suddenly, the air conditioning didn't seem to provide any relief. Then, your attention was drawn to a particular figure that stood slightly off to the side. You felt an almost magnetic pull, as if a current was urging you closer to it. Standing there, you experienced what felt like physical waves, one after another, pushing against you like the tug of the ocean surf. This figure was unlike any other piece you had seen. It was both simple and powerful, with a crude wooden body that looked rough and basic, as though crafted from a single piece of timber. Its limbs were like broom handles, and its torso was marionette-like, stiff and rigid. Yet, its head, clay-molded with shell eyes, stood out, exuding a strange, watchful quality. The air felt heavier, your ears ringing with pressure. The guide's voice faded, becoming muffled as if you were hearing her from underwater. Realizing you were intensely focused on the figure, she joined you and explained that it was from a tribe in Papua New Guinea, an ancestral protector meant to guard a family from harm. If the family faced hardship or sorrow, the figure would be destroyed, its protective role forfeited. This piece, however, had survived generations, a testament to its supposed power. Then she shared the haunting origin of its head. Molded from the skull of a deceased elder, with shells set over the eye sockets to give it a semblance of life. She quietly added, "If you ask me, it's still alive today." Curious but shaken, you continued with the group. Yet, as you left the gallery, your physical discomfort faded as quickly as it had come, leaving you feeling oddly refreshed. In the sun, talking to a classmate, you found yourself dwelling on the statue. Could it really hold some presence? Or was it simply your imagination? Before leaving, you felt compelled to see it one last time. Stepping back into the Islander Gallery alone, the waves of energy returned. With each step closer, the feeling grew. Finally, you stood before it, looking directly into its eyes. In a quiet voice, you acknowledged its strength, saying, "I feel your mana, and you are strong." Almost immediately, the air cleared, the waves of energy ceased, and a serene stillness filled the room. It felt as though the spirit or presence within the statue had understood you, accepted that you meant no harm. As you walked away to join your classmates, you carried a sense of respect, not just for the artifact, but for the beliefs and the power that cultures like this imbue in the objects they leave behind. Perhaps the ancestral protector still held remnants of its former purpose, standing as a silent sentinel even now. That day, you left with a new understanding of the energy and presence that lingers in the artifacts of the past. A reminder that some protections endure, long after their keepers are gone. If you ever want to experience the supernatural, just go to the small city of Savannah, Georgia. Haunted energy is everywhere there. It's as if every square inch holds a spirit, and it makes sense since it's one of the oldest cities in the United States. The locals live alongside these spirits almost nonchalantly. I once saw an object move by itself next to a cashier, and he just casually moved it back, saying, "Hey, ghost of Kevin, stop moving my stuff already." The city even thrives on its paranormal presence, with nightly tours and haunted bus rides as popular attractions. I went to college there as a hard skeptic, but I came out as a complete believer. Fun fact, my first dorm was a former coffin factory, just a glimpse of the macabre charm this little city holds. I experienced plenty of ghostly encounters during my 4 years there, but one memory still sends a chill down my spine. One night in my dorm, I woke up around 2 a.m. and needed to use the bathroom. I crossed the hall, and as I did, I saw someone out of the corner of my eye coming out of another room, heading toward the other bathroom. I assumed it was my dorm mate, who often stayed up late working on assignments. I didn't think much of it. After finishing, I started walking back to my room only to see the person walking back as well. I turned to wave, but as I did, I stopped dead in my tracks, and so did she. The girl in front of me wasn't my dorm mate. She had red hair, pale skin, and wore an oversized t-shirt that hung down to her knees. What was incredibly eerie was that she stopped at the exact moment I turned to look at her, but her eyes weren't on me. They were fixed on the door to my dorm mate's room. I felt a chill as I realized I hadn't actually heard the door to the bathroom open. Suddenly tense, I hurried back to my room, closed the door, and locked it. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the mind, maybe a friend of my dorm mate's, or just late-night fog. But moments later, my door began to shake violently, as if someone was trying to force it open. Startled, I called out, asking if it was my dorm mate. There was no answer. I gathered my nerves and opened the door. No one was there. I felt uneasy but tried to dismiss it as fatigue or my mind playing tricks. I eventually went back to bed, but sometime later, I was awakened again. Something felt off. I reached for my lamp, about to turn it on, when I saw a shape in front of my door. I glanced over and there she was. It was the same girl standing inside my room. Her eyes were pitch black, full of sadness, staring right at me. I yelled in shock and switched on the lamp, but she was gone in an instant. Hearing me, my dorm mate came out, asking if I was all right. I told her what I'd seen, but she didn't know what to make of it. The next day, I asked another dorm mate across the hall if she'd ever seen anything unusual. When I described the girl to her, her face went pale. She told me she'd seen the same figure and had researched the dorm's history. She found out that a female student had once taken her own life in her room. Tragically, suicides are not uncommon among students there, a shadow that lingers over the campus each year. To this day, the memory makes the hairs on my neck stand up. I can only hope that this spirit finds peace one day. I've always loved antique furniture, and my home is filled with pieces I care for deeply. From a wardrobe with an old mirror to an 18th century linen press. Each item brings a sense of history that I've come to appreciate. I even have a secretary with glass doors next to my bed, and after my mother passed, I started having vivid dreams. Once, I woke to find the glass doors slightly open, which gave me a bit of a chill. Still, nothing particularly strange has happened with these antiques. Mostly, I just feel a sense of responsibility, like it's my duty to care for them. My home is bright and cheerful, decorated in a southern traditional, beachy style, with these pieces interspersed here and there, adding character. One of my most beloved pieces was an old upright piano I bought in the 90s. It was a former player piano from around 1908, beautifully refinished, with a mirror where the music roll had once been. I bought it from an old collector in McDonough, Georgia, who had it in a dreary, barn-like shed filled with other pianos in various states of restoration. The instrument only cost me $150, which felt like a jackpot for a young single mom with an 8-year-old daughter eager to learn piano. We moved it in, and it became the heart of our home. My daughter would play it, her friends would gather around, and during the holidays, she'd lead us in Christmas carols as we all sang along. The piano truly became a piece of our family's life. When I remarried and we moved to a new home, my daughter decided to stop playing, so the piano was stored away in our basement. At one point, we even had an old sofa stored on top of it. One night, years later, my daughter, who was 2 stories above the basement, woke up screaming, "Mom! Mom!" She swore she'd heard the piano playing. My husband and I, bleary-eyed, thought we might have heard it too, though it felt almost dreamlike. My husband, baseball bat in hand, went down to check. He found the piano with the lid to the keys firmly closed, and nothing else was out of place. We tried to shrug it off, but I couldn't help but wonder if the piano was reminding us it was still there. We lived in that house for 10 years, never once playing the piano. But when we moved to our forever home, we brought it back out, placing it at the center of our family room. Later, when I inherited my mom's baby grand, we found ourselves with 2 pianos. As our daughter went off to college, we decided it was time to find a new home for the old upright. We considered giving it to a young family whose children wanted to learn, but that didn't work out. One Saturday, just as my husband and I were discussing what to do with it, there was a knock on our door. A local church youth group was playing a game where they traded up, starting with a small item and aiming for something larger or more valuable. They asked if we had anything they could take in exchange for an old flat-screen TV they'd acquired. My husband and I looked at each other, then said, "How about a piano?" We didn't think they'd take us up on it, but they looked thrilled. "Oh, we have a truck," they said. So, 10 teenage boys gathered around, rolling the piano out onto their truck, which, conveniently, had a hydraulic lift. Some of them could play, and as they loaded it, they started tapping out a few notes, filling the air with music. They took it to their youth room in the same church where our children had gone to preschool. It felt like the perfect home for our old piano, and in a way, I believe it was meant to be. Perhaps we were simply its caretakers until it found its next home. Looking back, I never thought to personify that piano, and I'd almost forgotten that eerie night when it seemed to play on its own. But sometimes, I like to think that maybe it had a life of its own, just waiting for the right moment to remind us of its presence. Philip Kafka's stories about antiques made me remember just how much certain items can hold onto a bit of magic or mystery from their past. Finding a place to sit in my great-aunt's home is an experience you don't easily forget. She's a bit of a hoarder, not like the extreme cases you see on TV, but there are still piles of personal items on every surface, making it awkward to move things just to find a seat. She lives in Dalton and is in her late 80s. I'll call her Edith because, well, she simply looks like an Edith. She's the sweetest woman on earth, and anyone who visits her will leave a little heavier, convinced by her that they must be starving. Edith has lived in the same house since the early 1960s. Back then, it was a typical split level with bedrooms upstairs and a garage below. The main rooms, the kitchen, living room, and dining area were on the ground floor. There was also a basement, at least theoretically, because I've never actually seen it. Since I was born in 1981, clutter has always blocked access to it. I only know it exists because of the basement door. My mom says Edith wasn't always a hoarder. Apparently, it started after her first husband died of a heart attack in the early 1970s. She'd never remarried until years later, but for a time, Edith's life was marked by quiet memories, and my mother recalls some strange happenings in that house, including sightings of her uncle's spirit. One story stands out. About a week after her uncle's funeral, my mom, who was a child at the time, was sleeping in the guest room. She was awakened by an overwhelming scent of flowers, so strong that it almost made it hard to breathe. When she sat up and rubbed her eyes, she could see her uncle in the wall-mounted mirror. He wasn't looking at her but rather toward the open door and the hallway light, as if searching for Edith. He wore his funeral clothes, and though he wasn't frightening, his presence left her uneasy. She didn't tell Edith about it, not wanting to upset her aunt, who was heartbroken. Mom finally shared the story with me years later, and ever since, I've had a slight hesitation about mirrors near my bed. In 1975, Edith remarried, but her second husband also passed away young, after battling a brain tumor. During the time they were together, he made a few additions to the house, expanding into the long backyard. Originally, there was a small garden area just outside the living room, but since Edith isn't exactly blessed with a green thumb, he moved the garden and extended the house, building a short hallway that connected to a new family room and a larger master bedroom. That hallway was unique. Someone with an odd sense of style covered the walls with frameless mirrors, top to bottom and end to end, creating a surreal, infinite reflection that felt like it went on forever. As I got older, I visited Edith less often. But when I was 20, my mom and I stayed at her house for a family wedding. Edith's house was full, so I ended up sleeping on a decorative Victorian-style couch in the new family room, close to that mirrored hallway. The couch looked charming but was hardly comfortable, and as I lay there, trying to sleep, I heard footsteps in the old living room. They weren't aimless footsteps. They had purpose, as though someone was on their way to see either Edith or me. From my spot on the couch, I could see down the hall of mirrors into a corner of the old living room. As the footsteps approached, I closed my eyes, pretending to be asleep. I heard them pause near the mirrors, and I peeked through barely open eyelids, only to see nothing. But the footsteps continued, moving closer until they reached the threshold of the room where I was lying. They sounded heavy, like the person was wearing thick-soled shoes. Despite the well-lit hallway, there was no one there. I tried to convince myself it was just someone walking upstairs, but the sound was distinctly coming from the hardwood floor directly outside my room. And that part of the house only had one floor. I finally sat up, looking down the hall at the empty mirrors reflecting into each other. Despite seeing nothing, my mind insisted that someone, a man, was standing there. I put on my headphones, hoping the music would drown out any other sounds. Strangely, I felt as though he couldn't pass beyond the hallway, almost like the old section of the house was where he belonged. I wondered if it was Edith's first husband, keeping an eye on her now that she was alone again. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep, but I felt terrible the next morning. I remember having an omelet for breakfast, grateful for the comfort of daylight. I visited Edith again in 2019, and the house was even more packed than before. A few years earlier, she'd remarried again at 85 to a man of 89. He doesn't live with her, though, since he can't move around in the house. He has his own place nearby. Edith's house doesn't worry me. The footsteps I heard, I believe, are perhaps just a residual echo of her past. Her first husband had a habit of standing by that old porch, now the hallway, and maybe that's what I sensed. If he is there, I like to think he's simply looking out for Edith, making sure she's happy and well. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. I've shared stories here before about experiences related to family members who've passed, but this one stands out as a turning point for me. 3 years ago, I went from being a curious skeptic to genuinely believing in the paranormal. Before this experience, I'd tell myself that I just wanted things to be signs from my loved ones. Things that made me think, that's interesting, but we'll never really know if it's supernatural. Then one day, I went for a walk at a Civil War battlefield near my neighborhood, and everything changed. I won't name the location because, fortunately, it's not well known for being haunted. I think that's a good thing. It's hallowed ground, a quiet place of remembrance where soldiers gave their last full measure. I wouldn't want it attracting people who might not respect its history or come for the wrong reasons. The battlefield is a national park with miles of trails. I used to run there, though it never felt quite right. Once, about 10 years ago, I was walking with some neighbors when I got an overwhelming sense of anxiety. This urge to run, as if my flight response had been triggered in broad daylight. I never told my friends, who just thought I was eager to pick up the pace. In a more remote part of the park stands a monument funded by the people of Illinois, dedicated to the soldiers who fell in a brutal 1864 battle. I remember taking a boyfriend there about 15 years ago, thinking he'd appreciate the history. As we approached the monument, the air grew heavy, even more humid, and the woods around us fell silent. A half-dozen deer stared at us from the tree line, watching in a way that felt off. We didn't say anything then, but later we both admitted we'd felt something strange that day. Fast forward to 3 years ago. My preteen son and I went for a walk there on a Tuesday in September around 2 p.m. We were walking along the same path the Union soldiers would have taken, down to a creek at the edge of the tree line where they'd have waited before the assault. I had a new iPhone with me and took a few pictures of my son on a small bridge. Then, almost on a whim, I decided to turn on the recorder as we walked up the hill. I'd been hearing some distant yells but assumed it was just kids in the woods nearby. Still, I hit record, feeling a little embarrassed, especially not wanting my son to see what I was doing. We walked up the hill, and as we climbed, I asked my son if he heard the yells. He said he did. He stood on a tree stump as I made my way up to the top, where we stopped to take a few photos by the monument before heading home. Later, I listened to the recording. The yells were there, loud and clear, and my husband heard them too. Even more chilling, there was a sound he described as having the sound and cadence of artillery fire, a sound we hadn't heard in person. And then, as we turned up the volume, we heard something else. An EVP. At the bottom of the hill, a male voice is captured saying, "There's something here I don't trust," followed by a faint female laugh. When I asked my son if he heard the yells, a very deep voice responded with the single word, "Here." Just before my son answered, a young boy's voice, much younger than my son and very close to the recorder, said, "Them soldiers is dead." A minute later, the same voice said, "What's that?" As I held my phone in front of me. It's surreal to say this, but the words, "them soldiers is dead," felt like something I would never have thought to say myself. especially since I'm a stickler for grammar. The boy's voice sounded so close, almost as if he was standing beside me. Months passed before I listened to it again, unsure what to do with it. Then, when the kids were at camp, my husband and I went to dinner nearby, and over a glass of wine we decided to revisit the battlefield. Dusk was falling as we arrived, and there were a few people at the monument. We sat on a bench at the top of the hill, and as we did, I felt something brush the back of my hair, a light touch that made me instinctively reach up to swat it away. Later, I realized it didn't feel like a bug or anything explainable. It felt like my hair flipping on its own. We decided to walk down the hill to the tree line. My husband, a former soldier and skeptic, commented, "It smells like wet canvas," a scent he remembered from old military tents. "You never forget that smell," he added. I glanced around, thinking, but there's no wet canvas out here. He headed back up the hill toward the parking lot while I lingered, trying to see if I felt anything. As I began my climb, I suddenly felt out of breath. By the time I reached the top, I was completely winded, leaning on the fence for support, almost as if I just sprinted up the hill. I brushed it off, assuming I was just out of shape. But a few weeks later, I returned to the same hill with my son to take some photos for a school project. This time, I walked up the hill effortlessly, without breaking a sweat. That's when it dawned on me that my previous breathlessness might have been an echo of the soldiers' own exhaustion and fear as they charged up that hill, many to their deaths. I drive by the battlefield regularly but haven't walked there since. Part of me feels uneasy about going back, even though I'm drawn to the place and know that many people visit daily to pay their respects. One final detail. I sent the EVP to a local Civil War historian, hoping to get his thoughts. He replied that he couldn't hear anything, but I have a hard time believing him. I think he heard it, but maybe he couldn't bring himself to admit it. He did tell me something interesting, though, that the battle on that hill had taken place after a month of daily rainstorms, which left the soldiers and their equipment soaked. Wet canvas. That detail made me wonder if what we experienced was more than just coincidence. 11 years ago, my two cats, Gretel and Mo, were killed by my sister's dog. At the time, I was staying with her while moving into a new house, and the loss devastated me. For a long time, I was inconsolable. I blamed myself, feeling that if I hadn't left the house, they'd still be here. I kept reliving the call from my sister, her words forever etched in my mind. She told me they found Mo in the laundry room with a broken neck, beneath a pile of overturned boxes. Gretel had somehow climbed up an empty wall to a high shelf, and they thought at first she was just hiding, terrified. But when they brought her down, blood was coming from her mouth. She died on the way to the vet. My sister waited until I got there to tell me, not wanting me to hear the news while driving. I'll never forget the word she used. Surreal. She said the dog door's lock had been broken, and the dog was just sleeping nearby. It was a heartbreaking reminder that nobody watches over your pets quite like you do. After their deaths, strange things began happening. All hours of the day, I would hear the sounds of cats around me. Their jingle ball toys, safely stored in a drawer, would somehow make noise. I heard scratching at the post we'd packed away in the closet. At least half the time when I opened a door, I'd feel a cat rushing past my ankles, like they always used to do. These things happened even in the new house, one my cats had never been in. It went on for so long that I visited a psychiatrist, hoping to find some peace. The psychiatrist explained that my mind was likely playing tricks, replaying familiar routines as if they were real. He said that grief and guilt could make the mind recreate comforting things, especially when we're in a fragile state. He reassured me that I hadn't lost my mind. His words were meant to comfort, but one part of our conversation bothered me. When I was about to leave, he casually remarked, "Cats only live about 15 years, anyway." It struck me as odd and a little callous. I awkwardly laughed it off, realizing he must not be an animal lover. Later that week, I bought some oven-baked clay from a craft store and molded 2 small cat figurines, painting them to look just like Gretel and Mo. I made Gretel a bit plump, and Mo sleek and aerodynamic just as they'd been. I apologized to them as I placed the figures on my bed's headboard. Oddly, I felt a sense of peace. My sister had told me the incident happened barely 10 paces from where my infant niece was sleeping in her rocker. At first, I clung to the idea that maybe they died in her place, that somehow, by being the first thing the dog encountered, they'd protected her. The thought brought me a small measure of comfort. With time, I came to accept that it was unlikely the dog would have harmed my niece. My cats were new, and he saw them as intruders in his territory. But I do believe it was Gretel and Mo visiting me during those early days of heartbreak. Maybe they wanted me to know they were there, to let me feel their presence and forgive myself. It was their way of saying goodbye, helping me to let go of my guilt and remember them with love. Over the last 25 years, I've had many experiences that have convinced me my late husband, Scott, still likes to reach out to me. Scott was a young Marine Corps aviator when he was diagnosed with a brain tumor at 27. The day of his biopsy, we discovered we were expecting our first baby. Despite the difficult diagnosis, he didn't let it stop him from living fully. We had our baby girl, and then, about 17 months later, we welcomed another. A surprise some might call an oopsie. But I see it as a gift. For 5 years, Scott fought his illness bravely, and we managed to find beautiful moments in between the bittersweet ones. He passed when the girls were just 2 and 4. Scott was always concerned with safety, especially when it came to our kids. When the news warned of mini-blind cords being a strangulation hazard, he would tie them up using his favorite Boy Scout knot, a knot that you could pull on once and it would fall out easily. I even have a video of him tying up the cords during our daughter's first birthday party. After he passed, the girls and I did our best to carry on. I can't say exactly when I first noticed it, but years later, I realized I was finding these knots on the cords of mini blinds around the house. Knots I knew I hadn't tied. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence. But once I noticed it, I'd find those Boy Scout knots in all sorts of places, in multiple homes we've lived in since. It got to the point where I would untie them and then forget about it, only to find them again later, almost like Scott was leaving a reminder for me. After years of being single, something incredible happened. Following 9/11, an old Marine friend of Scott's was traveling overseas and stopped through our town. He called me on a whim, and one thing led to another. We ended up dating long distance for a while. When my daughters were away at camp, we planned our first weekend together, and I was so excited. On that Friday afternoon, as I got out of the shower, I stepped on something sharp and looked down. It was Scott's aviator wings, which I kept in my jewelry box in the closet. Somehow they had ended up on my carpeted floor. I knew I hadn't touched them, and with the girls out of town, no one else could have moved them. Pulling them out of my foot, I couldn't help but laugh. It was just the kind of joke Scott would have played. But I hadn't had a tetanus shot in years, so I had to get one that day. It completely ruined my weekend plans, and my new beau and I joked that Scott was trying to send a message, though maybe we were only half joking. Months later, my new partner told me he loved me. Just as I said it back, a tin flower holder, a wall decoration I had in the kitchen, came crashing down onto the tile floor. It hadn't fallen before, and it hasn't fallen since. I knew it was Scott. The timing was just too perfect. There were other moments, too. Early in our relationship, Scott taught me to drive a stick shift, and we practiced in a cemetery. I remember jerking the truck and spilling coffee on him as he laughed. After his passing, I picked a gravesite for him, completely unaware at the time that it was directly next to the spot where we'd practiced driving and spilled that coffee. The coincidence felt like more than chance. And then there were the rainbows. Scott had a scar on his head from surgery that curved like an arch, and our daughter used to call it Daddy's Rainbow. The day of his funeral, as we drove home, a double rainbow appeared in the sky, and our daughters excitedly shouted, "Look, Mama, Daddy sent us a rainbow from heaven." Amazingly, we saw rainbows on the anniversary of his funeral for the next 2 years. I later learned that others who'd lost loved ones have experienced something similar, especially after plane crashes. The symbolism feels like Scott's unique way of saying hello. Over time, I remarried, and my husband and I both believed that meeting was meant to be, that Scott somehow had a hand in it. My husband and Scott had been friends, and though I dated during my 30s, he was the first person I ever wanted to go on a second date with. Years later, our youngest daughter, born from my second marriage, had a dream in which Scott appeared with a group of military men to protect her from a bad man who was chasing her. In her dream, Scott said, "You don't know me, but I know all about you," before getting into his big truck and driving away. When she shared this, it struck me deeply. I want to believe that Scott knows all about us and the happiness we've found, and that he's still our protector. If God has warriors in heaven, Scott's one of them. There was also the night my mother passed. She was a wonderful mom and mother-in-law, and her illness took us all by surprise. I was by her side when she passed, sitting in that in-between place before sleep, when suddenly I felt a presence. A hug that gently woke me. I jumped up, ran upstairs to get my brother, and just as I did, I realized something strange had happened. Despite going through menopause years before, I had suddenly gotten my period, right in that moment. My brother came down just in time for her last breath. Then, as we gathered, my phone rang. It was 2 a.m., and my husband was calling to tell me that an old Marine friend had just called him, asking about Scott and saying he'd felt compelled to check on me. It was uncanny. This friend had always seemed to know when to reach out, and that night, he'd had Scott on his mind. I later told my doctor about the strange occurrence with my period, and to my surprise, he believed it could have been a spiritual experience. These days, I feel that Scott and Mom are around for the big moments. In my heart, I imagine them being able to visit for occasions like our daughter's weddings, though I hope they're up there happily watching over us and maybe even enjoying a martini with friends. And sometimes, I think they're still protecting us in their own way, making sure we're safe and happy. On March 9, 2018, I was suddenly awoken at 1:14 a.m. by the sound of a few notes being played on my 12-year-old son's electronic keyboard in his room. I lay still for a moment, wondering if I just imagined it. Then I heard a single note play again. My first thought was that maybe my son was up, which would have been unusual for him. Our rooms are close together, and I would have heard him moving around before. I tried to think of another explanation, and my mind settled on our cat. Sometimes, he sleeps in my son's room, so I figured maybe he decided to play a little night music. But the notes sounded too deliberate, too composed to be from a random cat stroll. Besides, our cat had never jumped onto the keyboard before, and it wasn't exactly sturdy enough to withstand a pounce. Curious, I decided to go check. I wasn't worried, just intrigued, as I quietly crept down the hallway to my son's room. Peeking in, I saw that he was sound asleep. From my years working nights at a psychiatric hospital, I'd gotten pretty good at spotting signs of deep sleep, and my son was definitely in it. I scanned the room and found nothing out of place. Figuring that maybe he'd forgotten to turn the keyboard off and that it had somehow produced a sound by itself, I turned to head back to bed. But as I reached my own doorway, I realized something strange. The keyboard display hadn't been lit up, the way it usually is when the power is on. This thought brought me back to his room for another look. I found our cat awake, blinking sleepily but standing up on the bed, staring intently at the keyboard. This wasn't like him. He's usually curled up and settled for the night. I walked over to the keyboard and pressed a few keys. No sound came out, confirming that the power was off. Checking my son one last time, I found him softly snoring. Shrugging the whole incident off as unusual but harmless, I went back to bed. The next morning, as I woke him up for school, I saw something on the back of his t-shirt that made me smile. Printed across it were the words, "Rock isn't dead. It's just played by ghost of." The shirt had belonged to my brother, who had passed away suddenly in 2015. Music had been his passion, and he'd been in a band called Ghost of. For as long as I'd had the shirt, my son had never worn it before. But there he was, wearing it the very same night I'd been woken by those mysterious notes. Felt like more than just coincidence. My brother and I had always been very different. He was the charismatic, outgoing one with countless friends, while I was the quiet introvert, more likely to stay in than go out to a party. But we did share two things in common: a love for music and a fascination with ghost stories. Many nights, we'd sit together telling ghost stories, and he would always joke, "I'll come back to visit you when I die. Maybe it's true what they say. Rock isn't dead. It's just played by ghost of." My mother, Natasha, was born in Russia but grew up in the USA, and she's always loved anything old and unusual when it comes to furniture and art. a love that rubbed off on me a bit. My parents often went to auctions and estate sales to find unique pieces for their business, but it was rare for anything to come home with us unless it was truly special or just too strange to part with. Our childhood home was a blend of a madman's yard sale and an antique market belonging to a quirky collector. It was cluttered and chaotic, but it made for great stories. And as kids, it was perfect for building forts and letting our imaginations run wild. None of the antiques had ever bothered me, until my mother purchased a particular painting by an unknown artist. There was no signature on it, and no one knew who the woman in it was. The family selling it had bought a house where the painting had been left behind, along with other furniture they didn't care for, so off to the auction it went. My mother bought it along with a sideboard filled with old silverware and plates, which was odd since they'd told her it was empty. The painting was of a woman in her 30s, wearing a long blue-gray gown and standing on a veranda. A table beside her held a tea set, a kettle, and what looked like a plate of cakes or sandwiches. Behind her you could see flowers, a chair, and part of a window. It was probably painted around 1900 to 1910, judging by her fashion. The detail was hauntingly lifelike, almost as if the artist had poured their very soul into it. Once home, my mother hung it in the hallway between her bedroom and my dad's study. From the first day it was up, I felt uneasy around it. The hallway was usually warm, but now, walking past the painting, I'd get goosebumps, as if the air around it had turned ice cold. It felt like the woman in the painting was watching me. My twin sisters avoided looking at it, saying it made them uncomfortable, and my little brother would walk on the other side of the hall saying, "I don't like the lady. She makes me cold." Soon, the strange feelings turned into sounds. At night, we'd hear whispers coming from the hallway. Our house already had its share of friendly, quirky spirits we'd gotten used to over the years, but this was different. We'd catch flashes of blue-gray out of the corner of our eyes, or feel a strange touch on our arms when no one was there. The final straw was when my father, a huge man, 6 feet 5 inches, 350 pounds, felt a cold hand run up his back while he was in the shower. Even he couldn't shrug it off. Then things escalated. My little brother, who was only 5, was tripped on the stairs and felt a cold hand push him when he tried to get up. A large fern we kept in the hallway next to the painting started dying. It was over 20 years old and had been healthy until then. When we moved it away from the painting, it recovered, but the side that had faced the painting grew back mangled, as if something had infected it. Even a plant specialist couldn't explain it. Our 2 terrier mixes, Frankie and Dex, would whine and growl whenever they walked past the painting, and our aunt's poodle Lula refused to walk near it at all. Our cats, normally docile, tried to claw the painting one night after it had mysteriously fallen off its hook. Sally and Meg, our Maine Coons, both went wild, scratching at it until we finally took it away. Every night, the painting would come off its hook and rest against the wall, upright, as if someone had carefully placed it there. Finally, my mother, a spiritual person who'd always tolerated our friendly ghosts with good humor, had enough. She decided that something was definitely wrong with this painting, and we all agreed. So off to the auction it went, several times, in fact, but each new owner would return it after a month, mentioning strange whispers or pets that suddenly became terrified of it. The last we heard, a man in Florida who collected art bought it, unaware of its history. He tried to research its origins and only found a vague rumor that it might be a portrait of an artist's wife who died young. The man ended up storing it in his basement after his grandchildren were frightened by it, and he's kept it there ever since. But I wonder what will happen if it falls into the wrong hands after he passes. This painting isn't safe. Either a spirit is trapped within it, or it's carrying something darker. If you ever see this painting, please destroy it. It's not worth the trouble. I know it sounds like a story made up to scare kids, and maybe an adult man like me shouldn't be wary of an old painting of a stranger. But this painting is dangerous. Please, if you ever come across it, don't let it go on haunting people. When I was about 20, my grandpa became very sick. He had a lung disease that was quickly taking its toll. One day, he passed out at home, his breathing short and raspy, so my grandma called an ambulance. He was taken to a nearby hospital, only to be transferred to a larger one in Atlanta, Georgia. His lungs were filling with fluid, and though they tried draining it with a tube, they told us there was little hope. After 2 days with no improvement, it became clear he wouldn't have much longer. As soon as I got the call, I drove straight to Atlanta to be with him and my family. My grandpa and I had always been incredibly close. He understood me in ways few others did, and nothing was going to keep me from being there for him. After the 3-hour drive, I made it to the hospital, but the doctors were already advising us to call anyone who wanted to say goodbye. I sat with my grandpa for hours, talking to him like I always did. Though he was tubed and in a medicated coma, I knew he wouldn't want me to treat him any differently. I told him about my crazy drive, about the funny customers I'd met on my last shift, and I described the beautiful sunset from his window, encouraging him to open his eyes and see it for himself. But I knew he wouldn't. Mostly, I just told him how much I loved him and reminded him of our backyard camping trips, the times he came to my school concerts, and his biggest lesson to me: never let your fears stop you from chasing your dreams. As visiting hours ended, I kissed him on the cheek, hugged my grandma, and promised I wasn't leaving Atlanta in case anything got worse. After grabbing a quick bite with my mom and brother, I tried to find a cheap hotel nearby, but I couldn't afford any of them. So, I returned to the hospital parking lot, deciding to sleep in my car. It wasn't the safest or best idea, but I didn't want to be far away. I locked all my doors and curled up in the back seat, pulling my jacket over me as best I could. Physically and emotionally drained, I began to drift into a restless sleep, grieving the loss that felt inevitable. As I lay there, I suddenly felt long fingers run through my hair. Startled, I sat straight up, but no one was there. A faint, familiar scent filled my car, cheap perfume, and then I heard a woman's voice say gently, "Hush, he will pass peacefully. I will see to it. Sleep. I will watch over you." In that moment, a calm peace swept over me, and I drifted into a deeper sleep. An hour or so later, my phone rang. It was my grandma, letting me know that my grandpa was getting worse and that I should call the family to come say their goodbyes. I told her I loved her and started making the calls. By morning, we were all gathered around his bedside, praying for a miracle. As we stood there, I smelled the faint trace of the same cheap perfume from my car and felt a hand resting between my shoulder blades. I knew it was the same mysterious presence from the night before, even though the only thing behind me was his 4-pole. Turning my head, I caught a glimpse of a woman who looked to be in her late 30s, dressed in dark gray scrubs, with brown wavy hair. She smiled at me softly. As the doctors prepared to turn off the machines, I watched her move to my grandpa's side, placing a single hand on his chest. Within minutes, he was gone. The heart monitor let out its final, piercing sound, and as it did, the woman vanished. In my heart, I believe she was a nurse who once worked at the hospital, still watching over those who need her. I've never asked anyone about her. I thought it might be too strange to bring up, but in the end, it was a comforting experience that brought peace in a difficult time. I admit that the two things in this story don't exactly go together, but they happened within a day of each other. This morning, I left early for a doctor's appointment. Traffic was light just before 7 a.m., and as I drove through the commercial area in my neighborhood, my 5-year-old Toyota van was running perfectly. I was cruising along, lost in thought, when suddenly, the seatbelt mechanism activated and tightened across my chest as though I were about to crash. The unexpected jolt made my heart race. I slowed down, looked all around, and checked my mirrors. There was nothing. My seatbelt loosened on its own, and I continued driving, bewildered. Almost immediately, I realized I was near the spot where a young teacher, a local woman in her 20s, was tragically killed a few years ago. A carload of teenagers, speeding in the opposite direction, had crossed the center line and collided head-on with her car. The area is just beyond a Waffle House, near a Publix, on a wide, straight road with a center-turning lane. I remember that day clearly. My daughters and I were shopping nearby, and we saw ambulance lights in the distance. When we left the store, there was an eerie stillness in the air. The sky was a vivid, almost surreal shade of blue. I wonder if anyone else has noticed things seeming more vibrant when they have an experience. I can't quite describe it. It's not just a feeling but more like a heightened awareness. Sometimes it feels heavy, but on that day it felt light, almost bright. Later today, I shared the seatbelt story with my teenage son. As I talked, his eyes widened, and he said, "Mom, a kid from my school was hit by a car near that spot a few weeks ago, right by the Waffle House. He was on his scooter, walking home, and he didn't make it. So, within roughly 300 feet of each other, two young people had lost their lives. And that was the spot where my seatbelt malfunctioned. My car is in great shape, and the seatbelt has only ever tightened when I hit the brakes hard. At the same time, I've been wondering about something else. I've never experienced ringing in my ears, but as I was working on my computer recently, I started hearing an intense ringing. I was working on something that reminded me of my mom, who passed away in 2013, and I couldn't help but wonder if it was connected to her. I'd read somewhere that ringing ears can happen during paranormal investigations, but I couldn't tell if it was that or just the stress of the year. Just as I was wrapping up this note, I decided to take a video in my family room to capture the loud music from a swim meet outside. As I filmed, I noticed something on the screen. An orb, bright and clear, forming right in front of me, though I couldn't see it with my own eyes. I've never captured anything like that before, and as I watched, my ears started ringing again. A few years ago, I learned about a murder that had taken place in a prominent home in our community, right on a busy street that many people pass each day. Every time I drove by, I couldn't help but look, especially if the traffic light turned red. In this house, a local man had killed his landscaper in a crime of passion after discovering his wife's affair with him. He shot the man, kept the body in the trunk of his car for days, driving around with it, before finally returning to the house and leaving it in the garage. He then turned himself in to the authorities. The case intrigued me. Our community is quiet and upscale with very little crime, so the details of this incident lingered in my mind. A few months after the murder, someone bought the house and built a beautiful gazebo in the backyard, visible from the street corner. They put up a tall privacy fence, but even so, the house sat empty for years. Then, about a year ago, I noticed the house was for sale. I went onto a real estate website to check out the photos, not entirely to see the scene of the crime, but because I developed a bit of a knack for spotting strange things in photos over the years. With my background in photography, I could often pick up on oddities in light or detail. So I scrolled through the listing photo by photo. It looked like someone had renovated the house, maybe trying to flip it. I didn't see anything unusual until I got to a photo taken from outside the kitchen, looking in from the sunroom. If you look closely, there's a figure standing in the kitchen window, gazing out toward the photographer. Reflections of the sunroom's windows create bright squares in the glass, but above them, you can make out the faint outline of a man. He has dark areas where his eyes should be, and it almost looks like he's wearing a hoodie, though it's hard to tell. Curiously, the figure is only visible above the window's reflections. Where his body should be, there's nothing. The moment I spotted him, I saved the photo to my X-Files folder, a place where I keep strange images I've come across. I've even saved some personal family photos with similar oddities, and every now and then, I add a snipped image from the news or random moments, capturing phenomena that seem inexplicable. For years, I told my husband, if only I could contact the realtor, I could ask whether anyone was in the kitchen when the photos were taken. I wanted to debunk it if possible. Then, just yesterday, I was talking to a new friend I'd recently met through a local community project. She happened to be a realtor, and as we chatted, I casually mentioned the house. She looked at me in surprise and said, "Oh, that was my listing." I nearly fell out of my chair. I explained about the figure in the kitchen window, and she immediately remembered the day of the photo shoot. She said that the only people there were herself and the photographer, and that she'd been upstairs while the photographer worked. When I sent her the photo, she confirmed that it was definitely not her and shared more details about the property. Apparently, the investor who'd bought it dug up part of the garage floor and replaced the cement, though she didn't know why and didn't want to ask. She also mentioned how she'd been in the house alone many times, and how lights would be mysteriously left on, doors found open, and other odd disturbances after showings. I started wondering if it was really careless visitors, or perhaps something else. As it turns out, the first buyers after the murder had planned to stay. They even built that gazebo in the backyard. But for reasons unknown, they moved out after pouring a lot of money into the house. To this day, I can't shake the feeling that the figure in the kitchen window was somehow connected to that tragic past. People often say that poltergeist activity centers around adolescents experiencing emotional upheaval. I'm turning 39 this year, not exactly a teenager, but I do have a pretty active imagination. Last year wasn't my best. After 10 challenging years of marriage, I went through a divorce and found myself moving back in with my mom and stepfather in Hahira, Georgia. It was a fresh start, the fifth one, actually, and I was doing my best to keep a positive attitude. The house already had a strange energy when I moved in. All of us heard footsteps now and then, and at times we'd hear the voice of a child outside. My stepfather, Mark, was the first to notice it. He's a restless smoker, often out on the back porch at all hours due to a herniated disc that keeps him up through the night. One evening, just after midnight, he heard a child calling his name in a hushed, excited whisper. "Mark! Mark! Mark!" It called close to his ear. Mark said the voice was so close he thought someone was standing right beside him, but the floodlights illuminated everything nearby, and there was no one in sight. From that point on, he started smoking out on the front porch instead. To be honest, I thought he just needed sleep, but despite hearing footsteps myself, I tried to dismiss the strange occurrences, even as personal items of mine started moving around on their own. Twice, I found all my socks separated from each other in my drawer. I can be scatterbrained, but even I knew I hadn't done that. Then one day, I had an encounter that changed my mind. While I was in the backyard, a young boy named Colin wandered up. He was aimlessly coasting around and seemed to be searching for something. When I asked what he was looking for, he told me he was looking for a child who lived in my house. I explained that no children lived here, nor had there ever been any, since it was a new house and my parents were the first residents. Colin looked puzzled. "Does Mark live here?" he asked. "Yes, Mark lives here, but he's 67, I replied, curious now. "Who are you looking for?" Colin didn't answer and ran off, only to return a couple of hours later, insisting that a boy his age, about 7 or 8, lived in my house. He even claimed this boy had asked him to come back and play. He was certain he had seen him that very day. This mysterious child became the subject of a lot of speculation, though of course we never got any real answers. I learned that Colin lived nearby, but Mark said he'd never seen him before. It was strange, to say the least, that Colin knew Mark's name. I couldn't help but wonder if the ghostly child had somehow told Colin about us. The more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. Colin kept asking about the boy, and when I finally asked if he knew the child's name, he shrugged. "I don't know. I didn't ask." That same day, as I was standing in the middle of the large, open backyard, a small chunk of concrete came out of nowhere, hitting me right on the collarbone. I scanned the yard, following what seemed like the trajectory, but there was no one around who could have thrown it. The woods were a good 400 yards away, far too distant for anyone to hit me so accurately from there. After that, things became even stranger. One day, while my stepfather was out at a VA appointment, I had a truly unsettling experience. I was sitting in my room, checking my email, when I heard footsteps pass by in the hallway. They stopped in my mom's room, and I heard the distinct sound of a light switch clicking off. I got up and walked over, finding her bedroom door open. No one was in sight, but her closet light was on. I called out, "Mom, are you in the closet?" A voice from inside answered. No, it sounded exactly like her. For a moment, I just stood there, thinking, what fresh hell is this? Then I slowly backed out, down the hall and into the kitchen, where I looked out the window. Far off in the backyard, I could see my mom, tugging up weeds. She hadn't been inside at all. When she came back in, I asked if she'd somehow heard me earlier. She looked confused and had no idea what I was talking about. After that day, I decided it was time to take things seriously. I'd often recommended Rook's cleansing to others, so I decided to try it myself. Over the course of 3 days, while my parents were out of town, I followed the cleansing ritual. Since then, the house has been quiet. We haven't heard a peep from the footsteps, the voices, or the mysterious child. Looking back, it's a memory I'll always carry with me. A reminder of that strange chapter in my life in Hahira. My husband and I recently had an experience that's shaken us to the core. We're young, he's 20, and I'm 22. He works at a KFC in town, and he's struggled with severe anxiety, poor sleep, and frightening dreams. His childhood was tough. His mom was an alcoholic until a car accident on his 7th birthday served as her wake-up call. But his father's approach to religion was fear-based, and his 16-year-old brother's death when my husband was just 10 left a lasting scar. He's dealt with anger, anxiety, and depression for most of his life and has always harbored resentment toward God for his brother's passing. But then, recently, things took a darker turn. About a week ago, his 19-year-old assistant manager bought a Ouija board to mess around with at work. My husband called me, sounding disturbed, saying the board didn't like him, that it wanted his blood and his inner darkness. He ended up bringing it home, even though we'd already been experiencing strange activity around the house. Cabinets opening, the couch shifting when we weren't there, curtains inexplicably falling. And my 3-year-old daughter had mentioned seeing things here and there. We tried the Ouija board at home, carefully following every rule I could find. Not taunting or patronizing it, not asking what it wanted. The first time, I asked, "Is there anyone there?" It replied, "Yes." I asked for a name, and it spelled Dari. When I asked where it was from, it seemed to attempt spelling something, then went to goodbye. The second time, I asked, "Is anyone there?" Again, it answered yes. I asked if there were any children, and it said no. When I asked how many spirits were present, it answered 6. Then, when I asked where they were from, it spelled get out. I had to stop after that, my hands shaking, but my husband insisted we try one last time. This time, I asked, "Is there anyone here who wants to speak to us?" The planchette slid quickly to yes. I asked its name, and it pointed to no. When I asked where it was from, it started counting backward from 0. I'd read that when a spirit or entity begins counting backward, it's considered dangerous, a demon trying to escape. I quickly moved the planchette to goodbye, and after that, I begged my husband to stop using it. The next morning, we took it back to his manager. But that night at work, my husband used it again. When he came home, he said, "Please don't be mad." I knew immediately he'd touched the board. As I began to question him, he stopped me and said, "It said it wants my boss to kill me to release the dark inside." I thought he was joking until I saw the look in his eyes. His boss had refused to drive him home that night. He'd seen it too, along with several of my husband's co-workers. The board also told him he was symbolically the son of Satan, and that he'd been followed for 20 years, his entire life. Since then, my husband hasn't touched the board again, but his manager kept it. Strangely, no one has heard from him since. I'm genuinely afraid, especially considering we have 2 small daughters, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. We took advice and cleared out horror movies and books from the house, replaced them with Bibles, and were planning to go to church. But my husband, still wrestling with his own trauma, is convinced none of it will work. He has admitted that the experience gives him a strange sense of clarity, as if everything he's been through, the anxiety, depression, anger, makes sense now. I'm at a loss, and I'm scared for my husband and our family if we don't act soon. Some of the occurrences we've experienced. Our front door opened by itself, and our 1-year-old almost fell down 2 flights of stairs, and my 3-year-old got locked in our room, and my husband had to break the door to get her out. Unexplained noises, furniture moving and curtains falling, mysterious ashes and charred paper on the floor in front of our bed, soot smudges at the top of our doorframe, and our comforter balled up in the corner of the room. And just today, when we went to retrieve an old Bible his dad had loaned us from under the mattress, it was gone. We turned the place upside down, but it had disappeared. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My boyfriend and I recently experienced something for which neither of us could find an explanation. Both of us are academic, skeptical by nature, and dedicated to rational thought. As students with a background in scientific thinking, we strive to explain events that are common, repeatable, and systematically observable. Science, after all, is a process rather than a belief system. To give some context, here's a brief description of the floor plan. Imagine the living room as a rectangle. We were sitting on a couch against one of the long walls, with the television about 8 feet in front of us on the opposite long wall. To the right of the television is a corner with 2 doors, one leading to my boyfriend's bedroom and the other to the back porch. This short wall has both the back porch door and a window next to it, which looks out onto the porch. Aside from this door and window, there are no other windows in the room. At night, the back porch lights from surrounding apartments flood in, casting a decent amount of light in that corner. You can usually tell when people pass by outside because their shadows move distinctly, and you often hear them. Plus, my boyfriend's dog, a half-beagle with a reliable bark, will usually give them away. As we sat on the couch one night, watching late-night Comedy Central, I noticed a shadow move in the right-hand corner of the room. But it didn't behave like a typical shadow cast against a wall. Instead, it seemed to move in front of the wall, almost as if it were floating. It wasn't a solid mass. It looked like a shadow, but with a depth that made it pop out. It appeared to drift back and forth between the bedroom door and the porch door a few times, although it didn't seem to move purposefully between them so much as stay confined to that general area. The odd part was that there was no movement outside that could explain it. No one was walking by, and the dog remained silent. Given my angle on the couch, I would have seen if someone were casting a shadow outside, but there was nothing there. Initially, I thought it might be due to a drink I'd had earlier in the night. I didn't say anything, assuming I'd imagined it, until my boyfriend asked if I'd seen the strange shadow. I responded, "The one in the corner by the door?" He nodded, confirming that he'd seen it too. We discussed possible explanations for a few seconds, but nothing added up. There was no apparent cause. It was strange, but we both had a kind of, that was different reaction, shrugged it off and went back to our show. The event itself wasn't a grand spectacle, and I wouldn't call it paranormal. I haven't had any definitive experiences beyond vivid dreams or strong feelings in certain places. Nothing I'd classify as supernatural. My boyfriend has shared a couple of experiences he finds unexplainable, but they seem to unsettle him, so I don't press for details. Perhaps neither of us saw anything paranormal, just an unusual anomaly of physics. But I do find it fascinating, and I think others may appreciate hearing about a genuinely puzzling experience from people who approach life with an analytical mindset. For the past few months, I've had trouble sleeping, convinced I've seen a figure in my room at night. At first, it appeared toward the back wall, just barely visible. It was unsettling, but I told myself it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. Normally, I'm a rational person, so I tried to ignore it. Still, the restlessness continued. I've never had issues falling asleep before, so it felt unusual. Then, about a month ago, I thought I saw the shadow standing right next to my bed, looking down at me. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind, that I was psyching myself out. But it got to the point where I'd go to sleep with my MP3 player on, just to distract myself from the quiet and the occasional creaking of the house. I eventually confided in a friend, and after some discussion, we both agreed there was a possibility that something might actually be in my room. Oddly, the knowledge gave me a sense of relief. Perhaps it made it less terrifying because it was no longer an unknown. I shared the story with my friend Bree, and we both decided to try and communicate with the spirit. Curiosity got the better of us, so we made a makeshift Ouija board and waited until 3 a.m. to use it. Yes, I know many people warned us against it, but we were prepared and careful, following every rule I'd researched. We did make contact, though not in the way we expected. Rather than using the board, the spirit seemed to communicate through a candle we'd lit. After a few minutes of unusual movement from the flame, we closed the Ouija session to focus on the candle and keep our interaction with the board brief. The flame remained still until Bree began to address an old stuffed animal she had with her. Bree has long believed that her stuffed animal has some form of spirit ward attached to it, and even claimed it once protected her during a strange experience. As soon as she started asking questions, the candle flame began to flicker in a very unnatural way, almost quivering, as though someone were holding it and jiggling it. I pointed this out to her, and soon we began asking yes or no questions. Amazingly, the flame would bend in specific directions to answer us, far more than a simple flicker or movement from air currents. We even tested it by saying, "Just to be sure, could you bend the flame this way?" And each time, it responded exactly as we asked. For one final confirmation, we asked it to blow out the candle. It couldn't fully extinguish the flame, but it did nearly snuff it out twice, leading us to believe that the spirit was either low on energy or simply didn't have enough to blow out the flame completely. We ended the session and thanked the spirit for its communication. That part of the night was actually positive, and the spirit seemed patient. Though I'm not psychic, I felt a warm, friendly energy from it, which put me at ease. Bree and I went to bed happy and excited. She fell asleep first, clutching her stuffed animal. I was lying on my stomach, on the verge of sleep, when I heard a low growl right next to my left ear. It lasted only a second or two, but I was almost certain I hadn't imagined it. We do have dogs, but they're crated at night in the living room, and there was no way their growling could sound so close. I froze, and moments later, I felt fingers lightly brushing down my back. Then, about 20 minutes later, when I shifted my position, I heard the same growl in my right ear, followed by the feeling of fingers brushing across the back of my neck. Each time it happened, my body reacted in a way I can only describe as convulsing short bursts of involuntary movement, unlike anything I'd ever felt before. It wasn't shivers from cold or fear, and the sensations only lasted a few seconds. I have no family history of epilepsy, and as far as I know, no neurological conditions that could cause that kind of reaction. Somehow, I managed to fall asleep and woke up with no marks on me the next morning. The next day, I spread salt around my room as a precaution since I didn't have sage. I told Bree about what had happened, but she'd had no trouble sleeping at all that night. I wondered if this was the same spirit we'd communicated with earlier, or if something else had come through the Ouija board. My dog seemed fine, but my cat was clearly unsettled, staring intently under the bed. A few days later, though, the cat seemed comfortable again, even playful, and would dart under the bed to play with the bed skirt. I told another friend, Rebecca, about the experience, and she came over, curious to try communicating with the candle herself. We received responses, although some were hard to interpret. No matter where we tried in the house, the activity only seemed to work in my room. When we asked about the growling, the spirit claimed that it was responsible and said it was my guardian spirit. This struck me as strange. A guardian spirit, I thought, wouldn't growl in my ear or cause physical reactions that felt so unsettling. Something that's supposed to protect you shouldn't make you feel afraid. Still, I tried to convince myself that maybe I was just misunderstanding its intentions. In the weeks since, I haven't heard any more growling or felt the strange touches. But occasionally, when I'm alone in the house, I'll catch the scent of a burning candle even though none are lit. I'm left with an uneasy feeling, as if it isn't really gone and may still be lurking. Living in a small town in Georgia, resources for dealing with the supernatural are scarce. Approximately 2 to 3 months after moving across the country, I began noticing what people might call shadow figures. At first, they were rare and subtle, almost easy to overlook, so I didn't think much of it. They seemed like shadows resembling my family members, somewhat transparent and oblivious to my presence. I didn't mention it to anyone. It seemed trivial at the time. 2 years later, I moved back to my hometown. I didn't experience anything unusual for about a year until I started seeing and hearing new phenomena. One night, as I was falling asleep, I heard what sounded like someone speaking over the hum of my fan, which was placed right next to my head. The voice seemed to carry on a conversation, but I didn't hear any responses. Curiosity got the better of me, and I turned the fan off. The voice was coming from my brother's room next door. It sounded like someone talking through a cell phone. The next morning, I asked him about it, and he looked genuinely shocked. He hadn't been talking to anyone that night. Though he's easily spooked by the paranormal, I found it intriguing, even if I couldn't prove he wasn't playing a trick. Then, 3 months later, on my birthday, I stayed up late. It was around 1 or 2 a.m., and I felt an overwhelming wave of sadness out of nowhere. I was sitting at my computer in the same room where my father had passed away years earlier. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed what looked like floating dog hair. Shedding is common, so I didn't think much of it. But the hair was oddly suspended at waist height, floating along before making a strange 90-degree turn, moving directly toward my face. I watched it come closer, wondering if I was just sleep-deprived. As it got right in front of my eyes, I realized it wasn't dog hair at all. What I saw looked like a transparent, gold-tinted sphere with faint, inconsistent lines in it, almost as though it were trying to catch my attention. It danced in a small area for a few seconds before drifting toward an object that held significant meaning, connected to my dad and part of what had been weighing on my mind that night. Unsure of what I was seeing, I went to bed. The next day, I decided to set up a camera in my bedroom. It was a small portable device that could record for about an hour before the storage was full. I set it to record and placed it in my closet, making sure it was working properly. After a few hours, I checked it again, only to find that the camera had somehow switched to picture mode. No one else was home, so I set it up again, but this time the switch was set halfway between picture and film mode. After that, I decided to try taking photos instead. The first shot I took revealed odd, transparent circles floating around the room. I cleaned the lens and tried recreating the shot, but I couldn't reproduce the same effect. Curious, I began taking pictures around the house, and in some of them, these orbs would appear, clear, transparent spheres sometimes grouped together. Over the next few weeks, I captured dozens of pictures of these orbs. I started researching online and found that people have various names for them: energy orbs, angel orbs, and so on. Excited by the possible evidence, I shared my findings with a friend who was just as intrigued. Together, we took photos and tried recording audio while asking questions. The audio was low quality with natural static, but on playback, we could hear two distinct voices, one feminine and clear, and the other low and raspy, almost like a distant exhale. The second voice was harder to make out, but it seemed to respond more frequently than the first. One particular night, I tried asking if the orbs wanted me to follow them. They seemed to lead me to the staircase and eventually to my mother's room, a large space partly used for storage. My friend placed the audio recorder in a nearby bathroom while I sifted through old boxes. I found some papers belonging to my father, but nothing unusual. However, on the audio playback, we clearly heard the feminine voice saying, "Not that," right before I'd chosen an unrelated box. I took more pictures in the room, but the orbs seemed to disappear after that. After discovering an old camcorder with night vision, we decided to try filming in complete darkness. The camera had a small infrared light, allowing us to see clearly through the lens in black and white. In my brother's room, we started asking questions again, and through the camcorder, I began seeing small blue dots moving around the room. At first, I assumed it might be a bug, but the orbs grew in number, moving at a moderate speed, even passing through solid objects like a glass sliding door. The camcorder would occasionally shut off on its own, possibly due to its age. Between these experiments, I occasionally experienced strange sensations, like a sense of physical dread coming from a certain direction. We'd often see what we called red. It resembled a laser pointer flashing in midair, visible even without the camera. The red light would occasionally show up in either my room or my brother's room, though it never seemed to respond to our questions. As for the orbs in my photos, I primarily captured clear or white ones. Occasionally, I'd see a blue or green one outside, and once in a while, a gold one would appear in clusters. I remember one time catching a blue orb and hearing a faint electric crackle. I tested for reflections, dust, and water droplets, but nothing else produced the same results. The blue orb moved in ways that didn't match any natural explanation I could think of. The most intense experience happened one night while I was trying to fall asleep. Lying on my back, I had the urge to barely open my eyes without moving, just to reassure myself everything was as it should be. When I did, my view was tilted, almost as if I were sitting up in bed, though I hadn't moved. The room had an unnatural illumination, casting no shadows, making every object visible in sharp detail. I closed my eyes, reopened them, and saw a solid black silhouette, a human-shaped shadow, standing over me watching. Strangely, I felt no fear, only curiosity. I repeated this process a few times, and each time the figure changed position. Once, it was directly in front of me, its face marked with dark patterns resembling a tribal mask. Then it shifted to the opposite side of the bed before disappearing altogether. Eventually, I grew accustomed to the orbs and occasionally seeing these shadowy figures in the house. It felt as though the more we tried to reach out, the more elusive the answers became. It's been about 6 months since any of these intense experiences happened, though I occasionally still notice the orbs. My name is Mike, a U.S. Army veteran, and I'm sharing this story about events that happened to me in Hawaii, as close as I can recall them. These experiences took place after I was assigned to the 25th Infantry Division in Oahu. My wife, Nicole, and I were in our early 20s, thrilled at the chance to live in Hawaii, a place we'd only seen on postcards or TV. We shipped our belongings, including our car, and arrived on Oahu, ready for an exciting new chapter. Once my initial paperwork and briefings were complete, we found a rental house in Kapoi'ai, near the beach. It was perfect, peaceful, well-kept, and close to the base. Nicole settled in, and since I was often working long hours or training on other islands, she adopted 2 dogs from a nearby shelter to keep her company. They became a great comfort, accompanying her on walks to the beach and helping ease the solitude of those long days I was away. One day, while exploring, we discovered an overgrown area near Barber's Point. It was eerie, an old World War II staging ground with faded asphalt hidden under tall grass, railroad tracks leading to the beach, and scattered remnants of a place once bustling with wartime activity. The place felt heavy, as if shadows of the past still lingered. Later research confirmed it was used to prepare supplies and munitions for Pacific Island battles during World War II. The island was rich in history, and we became fascinated with the local lore, including legends of the Night Marchers, ghostly ancient warriors who roam Hawaii. One evening, feeling intrigued, Nicole and I decided to pull out our Ouija board. "Is there a spirit here who would like to communicate?" we asked, and the planchette moved to yes. We asked, "How did you die?" And the board spelled out a strange 3-digit number, which it repeated no matter how many times we asked. Just then, our floor lamp flickered on and off in a flash, and after that, all the board spelled out was the image of the moon. Taking this as a sign, we said goodbye. For a while, nothing unusual happened, but then, strange things began. The dogs started acting unsettled. They would growl in the middle of the night, looking intently into the dark hallway or up at the attic door in our closet as if something unseen was there. Their growling became a regular occurrence. One morning around 4:30, I got up as usual to make coffee and let the dogs out. But as we headed down the stairs, they froze. They were staring at the dark corner of the living room, paralyzed. Following their gaze, I could feel an intense presence glaring back at us. In an instant, the dogs bolted back up the stairs, terrified, and hid under the bed, refusing to come out. I was rattled but pushed it aside as I continued getting ready for the day. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling that something was in the house. Nicole soon began experiencing sleep paralysis episodes. She'd wake up unable to move, gripped with terror. Our dog Milo started sleeping by her side every night, refusing to leave her, even in the mornings. She also began feeling watched, like something was lurking around the corners or in dark rooms, observing her when she was alone or distracted. The dogs would often bark at unseen figures, and we both began catching glimpses of moving shadows. One night, I was jolted awake by growling. Only this time, it wasn't from the dogs. It was coming from between our pillows, a deep, menacing growl unlike anything I'd heard. I knew then that something was in the room with us. Over the next days, the activity escalated. Nicole set down a bowl of dog food, and moments later, it flew across the room, scattering food everywhere. We started hearing strange, mechanical voices around us. One night, I muttered, "I'll turn on some warm water," while washing up, and a cold, metallic voice repeated, Warm water, right next to me. I snapped, yeah, warm water. Shut up. My anger seemed to provoke it. The haunting worsened. One night, as Nicole lay in bed, our cat suddenly froze, hair standing on end. She watched wide-eyed, as a black mass slithered up the stairs, lingered in the hall, and drifted into the bathroom. We also began hearing an ear-splitting, distorted voice screaming through static, louder than anything our house could possibly produce. It was so loud, it shook us to our cores. The dogs would panic and start barking wildly, and even though it was deafening, our neighbors said they heard nothing. Then came the most terrifying sight of all. One night, I saw a shadow figure with glowing red eyes standing directly behind my wife. Furious, I jumped up, but it darted into the laundry room, vanishing before I could get there. I finally saw it and I knew it was real. The next morning, I went downstairs without turning on a light. This thing had haunted us long enough, lurking in the dark corners. I sensed it in the farthest corner of the living room, watching me. I faced it, furious, and stormed into the room. I saw it again. A black figure crouched on the floor, knees to its chest, looking at me with what felt like fear. "You are not welcome here. You are dead. Now get out," I shouted. I watched as it seemed to fall back, vanishing as if it had dropped over a cliff. After that confrontation, the disturbances finally stopped. Nicole's sleep paralysis vanished, and life slowly returned to normal. The dogs calmed down, and the heavy, dark feeling in our home disappeared. We moved out eventually, but I'll never forget those terrifying events. Hawaii is a place of intense beauty and history, but some parts are heavy with spirits, and our house was definitely one of them. About 20 years ago, when my family and I were living in Navy housing in Oahu, Hawaii, my daughter and I had an experience that remains vivid and unsettling to this day. I had never been one to believe in ghosts or supernatural events, and we didn't talk about those things in our home. Yet what we witnessed changed my perspective entirely. It was a sunny summer day. My husband was at work, my older daughter was out surfing, and I was home with my youngest. We'd just finished lunch and decided to relax in front of the TV. The TV room was set up just off the living and dining area, separated by two large sliding doors. My daughter was sitting on a love seat against the wall that divided the rooms, while I sat in a chair across from her. The TV was to the side of us, on a low bookcase below a row of windows. While we were watching TV, something suddenly appeared in the room, a kind of shimmery, sparkly mass, almost like static, flickering and flashing. It moved from the living room, right between us and the TV, and glided across the room, disappearing out the back door. For a few seconds, we just sat there, stunned, before my daughter jumped into my lap, gripping me tightly. When I looked into her wide, panicked eyes, I knew she'd seen it too. After a long moment of silence, she asked, her voice trembling, "What was that?" Trying to keep calm, I offered a logical explanation. I told her it was probably the sunlight reflecting off a car outside. But then, in a near whisper, she replied, "But all the blinds are down." She was right. The blinds were fully closed, which made her question impossible to dismiss. Not wanting to scare her further, I quickly changed the subject and suggested we go pick up her sister and get some shaved ice. And just like that, we pushed it to the back of our minds. We mentioned it to family and friends in the following weeks, but eventually, it faded into a strange memory. 2 years later, when my husband was reassigned to Rhode Island, he moved back ahead of us to get our home ready. The girls and I stayed in Hawaii for a few more months so they could finish the school year. As we neared our move date, I spent the last few days on the island alone, cleaning out our empty house. Our belongings had shipped out the day before, leaving just me and an empty, echoing space to prepare for inspection. The day before, I'd cleaned the kitchen and laundry area, and now I was mopping the living and dining room, finishing up. The house was quiet, and I remember thinking how warm it felt without the air conditioner. I was focused on my task when, all of a sudden, that same shimmery, sparkling mass appeared again. Crossed the room right in front of me. I froze, barely breathing. This time, alone in the empty house, I didn't want to stick around to question what it was. I packed up my cleaning supplies, grabbed my purse, and left, without finishing the job. I didn't care. I abandoned my mop and bucket on the curb with the trash, got into the car, and drove away without looking back. In all the years since, I've never seen anything like that again. I've also grown more open-minded about the paranormal, and now I watch ghost hunting shows and the like. I still feel like there could be a logical explanation for what my daughter and I saw, but so far, I haven't come across anything that fits. Before I experienced this, I had never believed in ghosts or the paranormal. Being an atheist, I assumed that if spirituality was a human construct, then surely ghostly encounters were just products of the imagination. But that changed one night during a late drive home. It was around 3 a.m., and I was on my way back from work, driving through my neighborhood on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. While I had no belief in the supernatural, I was aware that Hawaiian culture is steeped in stories of spirits, and the rich history behind these tales can silence even the most skeptical listener. That night, I was just focused on finding a parking spot since our townhouse lot was closed for resurfacing. All the streetlights were out because of ongoing electrical work, adding a thick layer of darkness to the streets. As I turned left, looking for a place to park, I slammed on the brakes. There, standing perfectly still in the middle of the road, was a woman dressed in a torn and ragged white muumuu, a traditional Hawaiian dress. My first thought was that she was a pedestrian I hadn't seen in time. But as I looked closer, chills ran through me. Her hair was long and wild, covering most of her face, much like the girl from The Ring. I honked my horn lightly, hoping she'd move, but she didn't. Instead, she slowly turned to face me and lunged. Her face was unforgettable, dark, furious, and smeared with blood. In her arms, she held a dirty baby doll. She stopped just inches from my driver's side window, glaring at me before backing away, her gaze locked onto mine. That was it. I floored it, looking back in horror as I realized she was now somehow behind my car. Heart pounding, I took a U-turn and circled back, trying to lose her. But when I looked down the street I had originally seen her on, there she was in the same spot clutching her doll. This time, she seemed enraged, violently shaking the doll and screaming. I was horrified but tried to make sense of it. The distance I had covered in my car would have taken her 15 minutes to walk, yet somehow in 2 minutes she'd returned to her spot. I circled the area a few more times, and each time, she was still there on the vertical road of a T-intersection, unable to cross onto the road I was on. Panic set in as I realized I would have to park somewhere and eventually walk home, something I couldn't imagine doing with her nearby. So, I drove straight to the police station a few minutes away and asked for help. They sent an officer to follow me home, but by the time we returned, she was gone. All the streetlights had mysteriously come back on. I apologized to the officer, who likely thought I was overreacting, and hurried into my house, locking the doors behind me. The next day, I received a text from my neighbor, a family friend for over 30 years. She'd been curious about my odd driving the night before. From her window, she had seen my car swerving, stopping, honking, and speeding off. She assumed I was distracted or texting. I explained what had happened, and being deeply religious, she advised me to pray for protection. And for the first time in years, I seriously considered it. But the strange events didn't end there. Since that night, whenever I nap on my living room couch alone, I wake up paralyzed, staring up at the second floor. There, a veiled woman in black darts in and out of the master bedroom, laughing. Sometimes she stands over me, watching me sleep, her hideous face looming closer. As I begin to fully wake, she tries to take on the appearance of my mother, but as soon as I snap to full awareness, her face reverts to her haunting, natural form. Then, just a few days after that first encounter with the lady in white, I was involved in a major head-on collision. The driver who hit me was drunk, driving a massive Ford F-250 that could have easily flattened my tiny Honda if I'd been a split second slower or faster. Miraculously, I walked away, but it was a close call. Even now, the memory of that night and everything that followed still haunts me. As someone who once dismissed the idea of the supernatural, I'm left questioning everything I thought I knew. Whether a spirit or something else entirely, I can't ignore the presence I encountered, and I'll always wonder if it's watching, waiting, somewhere in the shadows. Since I was young, strange occurrences have followed me, no matter where I went. It all started back in Oklahoma, in my childhood home, where odd happenings began around an old, out-of-tune piano my family had picked up when I was 4. I loved that piano and often played it by ear. But when I was alone, I'd hear a few keys play on their own, despite the cover being on. My parents dismissed it, chalking it up to imagination, and my brothers thought I was making it up. Things escalated slowly. For instance, sometimes we'd hear knocking on the bathroom door when no one was nearby. Even my dad once admitted hearing it when no one else was home. My mom would always find an explanation, but the knocks and occasional footsteps continued. Years later, when I was 14, we moved to Alaska. I thought the strange happenings would end, but they didn't. Twice, I saw a dark, child-sized silhouette down the hallway toward my parents' room. The figure would vanish the moment I registered it. When I told my mom, she didn't brush it off. She revealed that she once woke up to a girl's voice whispering, "Mom," in her ear. She had dismissed it as a dream until it happened again minutes later. At our new home, random doorbell rings became routine, and we frequently encountered cold spots throughout the house. There was an unspoken understanding that some presence lingered with us. Then, my brother's in-laws stayed with us one summer, and the mother had an experience identical to my mom's. She woke to a whispering "Mom" in her ear, even though her daughter was sound asleep. She never knew about my mom's experience, and we never told her. By the time I moved out, I had grown accustomed to the disturbances. In my new place, I began to experience a sensation like a cat walking across my bed. But I had no pets. It happened so often that I confided in a coworker who was into the paranormal. She advised me to be firm and ask the spirit to leave. I tried it, and for a few weeks everything went quiet. But soon after, things became more hostile. One night around 4 a.m., my iPod dock downstairs blasted music at full volume. On another evening, while watching TV with my roommate, we heard the upstairs sink running. And my floral decorations, one in particular that I had brought from Alaska, would fall over for no reason. Despite my irritation, I got used to it. Eventually, I met my husband and he moved in with me. When he brought home a cat, I thought perhaps it would help. Maybe the animal could keep whatever it was at bay. Instead, our cat would often sit and stare intensely at random spots in the house, making things even eerier. When we got married, we relocated to a small apartment in Hawaii, thinking it'd be a fresh start. But the spirit followed us. Strange occurrences resumed quickly in our new place. My husband, now sharing my experiences, began having nightmares, often about a dark figure hovering over him and paralyzing him in his sleep. The floral decoration from Alaska continued to fall over, and the single closet door would rattle randomly. One night, while we were eating, I felt an unmistakable breath and a groan right in my ear. It was so sudden and intense that I screamed. This happened 2 more times during our stay in that apartment. Then we learned I was pregnant and we needed a bigger space. We found a house near Pearl Harbor, hoping this new start would finally bring peace. But on our 3rd night there, while my husband was at night classes, someone knocked on the front door. It was nearly 9 p.m., and when I opened the door, no one was there. That was the only time I experienced a physical knock, but it left me on edge. The dreams, however, intensified. Both my husband and I began having vivid, paralyzing dreams where we felt a heavy presence forcing us to stare at darkened corners of the room. These dreams felt disturbingly real, and sometimes we'd wake up in the same position we'd been dreaming in. The exhaustion from these dreams, combined with my pregnancy, was overwhelming. My husband, who was raised in a religious family, started regularly blessing the house with holy water and burning sage. I put up a cross near our baby's crib, but the very next day, it had fallen, leaving the nail still firmly in the wall. I took down all decorations near his crib after that, not willing to take any chances. Our baby was born in April 2014, and though he was healthy, he would often wake up screaming. turning red as if in pain. He eventually only slept peacefully if he was cradled in my arms. One night, I had another one of those paralyzing dreams, only this time, it was with my son in my arms. In the dream, I was sitting up, watching a corner of the closet darken, feeling a pressure around my neck. I wasn't sure if it was a dream or real, and I struggled to move my hand over my baby's head to protect him. The intensity of that dream left me shaken, especially since my husband had experienced a similar one where he saw a dark silhouette standing by our bed. Tonight, things escalated even further. After dinner, as I cleared the plates, one of the chairs moved by itself. No one was near it. That was the final straw. I am now filled with a deep worry that this spirit is more than just a harmless presence. I'm terrified it could harm my baby. My stepkids are scared to sleep without the lights on, and even our dog growls and barks at empty spaces. We've blessed our home countless times, but nothing has changed. I feel as though this entity isn't tied to a place but to me, following me across states and into new homes. I don't know what it wants or why it lingers, but I can't shake the feeling that it has more sinister intentions. Many years ago, I lived on Oahu, Hawaii. I was just 19, newly married to a man in the military, and we moved into old base housing from the 1930s. The houses were a bit rustic, with wiring visible on the outside walls, hinting at the era before electricity was installed. I felt a bit apprehensive moving into such an old place, especially one so close to Pearl Harbor, where intense trauma had unfolded. I half expected some eerie happenings, but after a few weeks, I felt at ease and even cozy in our new home. Those were happy days. I became close with another military spouse who shared my love for animals. She had a small menagerie of pets and even did wildlife rehab, mainly with birds, and I often helped her care for them. Her house was in a slightly newer part of the base, built in the 1960s with cement block construction. When her husband was deployed, I'd spend many evenings there. We'd chat for hours, surrounded by the lively sounds of her makeshift aviary on the lanai. Her large, white parrot, loud and bossy, added to the fun. It was a place full of energy. One day, my friend asked if I could feed her animals early in the morning while she was out preparing for the Merry Monarch parade. I gladly agreed, but when I arrived, something felt off. The house looked unnaturally dark, as if it were holding shadows despite the morning light. Dismissing it as early morning gloom, I walked in. But as soon as I stepped inside, an unsettling feeling took hold, as if I were intruding. I kept reminding myself, she asked me to do this, but the tension was thick, pressing down on me. As I started feeding the animals, the feeling grew worse. It felt like someone was watching me closely, their presence hot and angry. My heart pounded as I hurried through the routine, filling bowls and latching cages faster and faster. I felt like something or someone was following me from room to room, getting closer with every step. My skin was clammy, my breath short. By the time I finished, I felt as though I were fleeing. I bolted out of the house, barely managing to lock the door. Later, I told my friend about the experience, expecting her to laugh it off, but instead, she nodded knowingly. "Oh, that feeling. I probably should have mentioned it," she said. She admitted she'd felt the same thing, especially when her husband was away. It seemed like something dark and angry lingered in her home, though it didn't bother her much anymore. She thought it was just residual energy, as if the house itself had absorbed something from a past tenant's sadness or rage. Curious, I asked her what she'd heard about the house. She told me that neighbors mentioned a man who had once lived there with his wife. Their marriage was fraught with arguments, and eventually, his wife left him. There was no concrete evidence, but I had this strong, inexplicable feeling that he had taken his life in the house, in the back left bedroom. My friend shook her head, unconvinced. She thought it was just the negative energy left behind by his sadness and stress, not an actual spirit. But the fear and anger I felt in that house were so intense, like being thrust into the middle of an explosive argument. Even though she stayed in that house with no real incidents, that oppressive presence had left a lasting impression on me. We both moved away eventually, leaving the house and whatever resided within it behind. But I still wonder, Was that dark energy simply a residual imprint of past despair? Or was something more tangible reaching out, trapped and unsettled? I'll never truly know, but that feeling haunts me to this day. Ever since my youngest sister was born, my family and I have encountered something unusual. We've all seen, heard, and even smelled this presence over the years. As I type this, I can actually smell it now. A woody, natural scent, almost like the cover scent you'd spray on before going hunting. My family consists of 5 people. My mom, dad, my middle sister, my youngest sister, and me, the oldest. My youngest sister, who's now 12, seems to be aware of it but acts like it's nothing. It all started when she was just a toddler, barely speaking in complete words. One day, I was sitting in the living room watching TV. From there, you can see the kitchen to the right, the dining room to the left, and the front foyer just beyond. My mom was in the kitchen, and I saw our old dog, Ian, a lab mix, come in from the foyer. Suddenly, he froze and started growling at something under the dining room table. My little sister toddled into the room and tried to keep going, but Ian, still growling, blocked her path, nudging her backward as if he were protecting her. When my mom picked her up, she pointed under the table, babbling excitedly. A few months later, I was in the living room again, and my mom was washing dishes in the kitchen. Suddenly, she dropped a plate and began to flail her arms as though swatting something away, yelling, "Move on! Go to the light! You're not welcome here!" She composed herself and finished the dishes, and though I never asked her about it, I had a feeling that it might have been the same presence. One night not long after, I was staying in my sister's room when my mom came in to check on my youngest sister. My middle sister, who was half asleep, suddenly shot up and said, "Mom, is Dad home?" My mom replied that he was out on call for work. My sister pointed toward their room and said, "Well, who's that man in your room?" Mom went pale, but when she looked, no one was there. I was apparently still asleep when I mumbled, "That's okay. I see him sometimes too." That night, my mom slept in our room with us. A few months later, when my dad was out of town, I was sleeping soundly when I felt my mom wake me up. She looked terrified, holding a .45 handgun, and told me to get my middle sister, bring her to her room, and lock the door behind us. This would scare any kid, but I pulled myself together, grabbed my sister, and made my way to Mom's room. I glanced downstairs to see Ian sitting on the bottom step, staring into the dining room with a deep, unsettling growl. Earlier that day, I'd gone to school, then to Boy Scouts, and my mom had dropped me off before going shopping. When we got home that night, the door from the garage into the house was wide open, as was the back door in the living room. Mom thought maybe she'd left it unlocked and the draft blew it open, but she had our neighbor check the house with her, and nothing was out of place. After the strange occurrences continued, we called our Roman Catholic priest to bless the house, and for a while things quieted down. Years later, after we moved into a new house, brand new, in fact, the presence seemed to follow us. At first, there was nothing unusual, but after about a year, my mom started noticing the dry goods cabinet door would be open. One day, after she'd closed it for the 5th time, I decided to taunt the spirit. At that exact moment, the outside speakers suddenly turned on. My mom and I just stared at each other, then laughed. It was all we could do. No one else was home, and the only way to turn on the speakers was through a complicated setup. Since then, I've had occasional experiences that seem to be linked to the presence. Recently, when my mom and dad were on a cruise and I was away in Florida with my girlfriend, my middle sister stayed home with my youngest sister. Just before I arrived back home, my middle sister called, asking me to hurry. When I got home, she said she'd felt an unsettling presence all day, and doors and cabinets kept opening by themselves. Trying to lighten the mood, I taunted the spirit again, but she begged me to stop. As we continued talking, we noticed that my youngest sister's bedroom light had turned on and the door had shut by itself. I knew we'd left her asleep in the dark with the door open. I checked, and sure enough, she was still fast asleep. My middle sister, by now in tears, then told me she'd clearly heard someone call her name. I ended up sleeping on a pallet in her room that night. Around 3 a.m., I woke up to my sister whispering my name. I listened and could hear footsteps outside the room, followed by a loud banging noise. I knew it wasn't our little sister, and our new dog, Cabela, was with us in the room. I grabbed my 9mm Beretta, searched the house, but found nothing. After all these years, I'm starting to believe this presence might be here to stay. It hasn't caused us harm, though it often leaves us unsettled and aware of its presence. Any insights would be greatly appreciated. I have a feeling this isn't over yet. My dad passed away in October 2011 at the age of 65. He was young, and his passing left a big void in my life. He was a wonderful man, always doing whatever he could to make us happy, and would have given us his last dollar if it meant seeing us smile. My childhood was filled with love and laughter thanks to him. When I was about 9, my parents divorced and my mom, sister, and I moved an hour away. It was heartbreaking to know that I wouldn't see my dad as much. Despite the distance, we stayed close. My dad never remarried and struggled with depression after the divorce, and it only got worse after he was diagnosed with diabetes when I was about 12. His health went downhill from there, but we kept our bond strong. I looked after him in any way I could, especially as he stayed in the same trailer he'd bought when he married my mom over 30 years ago. He was independent and had a lot of pride, even though he was stubborn. My aunt often offered for him to live with her in Florida, but he preferred to stay near us. A few years ago, though, his memory began to deteriorate. One night, a young boy knocked on his door, saying he was locked out of his house and needed help getting in. My dad, being the kind man he was, agreed to help. But when he did, he was accused of breaking and entering. Charges were dropped later, but my aunt decided enough was enough, and this time, she insisted that he move to Florida with her. It was hard to see him go, but I knew he'd be cared for, and I wouldn't have to worry about him as much. Unfortunately, his health worsened quickly after he moved. We still spoke often, although he would call several times a day, often forgetting we'd already talked. I didn't mind, though. I just wanted him to feel like himself, and besides, I loved our conversations. But my dad always downplayed how he was doing, not wanting to worry me. My aunt, on the other hand, kept me updated. One day, she called to tell me that he'd been diagnosed with lung cancer, and it was spreading fast. Felt like my world was crashing. The next few months are a blur. Chemo wasn't an option because the cancer was too advanced. My dad couldn't remember much, and our conversations became shorter. I visited him as much as I could, but it was never enough. The last time I saw him, he was in hospice, and he didn't recognize me. It broke my heart. But before I left, I said, "Gimme that wink." That had always been our thing. To my surprise, he immediately winked at me. A week later, he passed away. I wasn't there, which was hard to accept. I was at peace knowing he was no longer suffering, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't been there when he needed me most. For the longest time, I didn't dream about my dad. But then, a few months after his passing, I finally did. In my dream, I was in his house looking for him, calling his name, but I couldn't find him anywhere. Then, suddenly, I saw this white fog in front of me. I knew right away it was him. He looked strong, like he did in his healthier days, and he hugged me. In my dream, I was crying, calling out for him, not wanting to let go. The dream must have been so vivid because I woke up saying, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy," and crying. Even after I realized I'd been dreaming, I felt a pressure on the back of my arm. A strong but gentle hold, almost like someone was reassuring me. As I fully woke up, the pressure eased, but I was left with an incredible sense of peace. It felt like my dad was there, telling me, "It's okay, sweetie." That's what he always called me. I went back to sleep, and when I woke up again, I felt comforted in a way I hadn't in a long time. This isn't exactly a ghost story, but it feels close. I believe he's my guardian angel now, watching over me just like he always did. I miss my dad every day, but this experience helps me feel like he's still with me in some way. I live in Augusta, Georgia, and I'm 17. I've spent my entire life in the same house, a place that's been in my family for generations. It's about 106 years old and was built by my ancestors, with a bit of a twist. Behind our house are woods that used to be a cemetery. Growing up, I'd always notice strange things. Objects moving, voices when I was home alone, but nothing too intense. But when I was around 16, things got stranger. I had a fascination with the darker side of things, like demons and mysteries, though I kept it mostly fictional since my family is deeply Christian. Then I met my best friend, Shakira, who shared my interest in the paranormal, and we'd often talk about these things together. One day, Shakira and I had the idea to try to summon a demon. Sounds absurd, but we honestly didn't think anything would happen. We Googled how to do it, grabbed Shakira's oil crayons, and sketched a big pentagram on her bedroom floor. I sat in the center, closed my eyes, and started a ritual that's supposed to be for contacting spirits, not demons. But soon, I could hear footsteps circling the pentagram, and I felt something like nails running up my back. I opened my eyes in a panic, and though my vision was blurred, I saw what looked like a red pentagram glowing on the wall. But after that, things seemed normal, and I went home thinking nothing of it. Over the next few weeks, though, strange things started happening. Both Shakira and I started seeing shadowy figures, tall and thin, with sharp outlines and glowing eyes, sometimes red, sometimes white. They would appear in mirrors, on the edges of our beds, in the bathroom, anywhere you'd least want to see a creepy figure. My house began losing power every couple of days, and during those times, these figures seemed to fill every shadow. At first, I thought maybe I was imagining things, or maybe Shakira and I were somehow feeding off each other's paranoia. But then I noticed my cats, Patches and Azzy, acting anxious around these shadows, as if they were seeing them too. I slowly got used to these figures, and strangely, they became less frequent. There was a strange, almost magnetic feeling to them that I can't quite explain, but I guess you could say I felt a sort of fatal attraction. I shared these experiences with my friends Katie and Amy. Amy's mom was Wiccan, so she was familiar with these things, but Katie was new to it and wanted to try summoning something herself. Being the curious type, I agreed, so we skipped a class and hid in the school bathroom. This time, I did more research, drawing a green pentagram on the wall and making an herbal summoning elixir. I carved the name of a supposed demon god, Salos, into an orange candle and recited a prayer. Almost instantly, we felt an intense atmosphere, an almost intoxicating aura. There was no fear, just a strange, overwhelming feeling. We heard a voice whistling Beethoven, and Katie, exhausted, leaned against the pentagram. After a few moments, she collapsed, crying and swearing she'd seen her late sister's face in the pentagram. After that experience, I stopped messing with demons. I don't talk to Shakira or Katie anymore, but Amy and I still share the occasional strange encounter. It seems that shadows still follow me, though less frequently now. My boyfriend, Roy, who's very spiritual, claimed he could sense these same entities and said he could summon light beings to counteract them. Now I occasionally see gold and white orbs, which I think of as angels. I can't say for certain if all of this is real or if we're just impressionable teenagers with overactive imaginations. But I personally believe in demons and angels. I returned to Christianity and have since barricaded my room with crucifixes. The dark figures appear far less often now. I've burned all my old pentagrams and wear a rosary every day, hoping one day I'll be free of my past mistakes. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: don't dabble in darkness, because you never know when it might dabble back. This happened several years ago when I was 16. I'm 22 now, so it doesn't freak me out like it used to, but whenever I tell someone this story, no one seems to know what it could have been. So I'm sharing here in case anyone's had a similar experience. It was summertime and my family, who's from Middle Georgia, kept a camper at a campground down in Vienna, Georgia, right off the Flint River. We were there almost every weekend, and it was a lot of fun. There were always kids my age, and since it was a safe, close-knit campground, we were allowed to come and go as we pleased. But this weekend was quiet. None of my friends were around except for Josh, who was 16 at the time. He and I were close like siblings. It was late, close to 2 a.m., and I was up watching TV. Josh texted me, asking if I wanted to go for a ride in his new truck. Since we were in a small campground and my family trusted him, it wasn't a big deal, so I met him at the end of the campground. We didn't go far before deciding to turn back, just in case the police were around and caught us out past curfew. There's a small store at the campground that sells snacks, fishing gear, and such, so he parked his truck there and we sat in the lot talking about what was going on in our lives, specifically what he should do about his ex-girlfriend. I was too focused on giving advice to pay attention to the time, but it was probably closer to 3 a.m. when this happened. Josh is a smaller guy, about 5 feet 5 inches and maybe 125 pounds, but he had a huge, lifted truck, classic Southern style, 37-inch tires and a 6-inch lift. As we were talking, we felt the whole back end of the truck drop down and then pop back up, almost like someone had jumped onto the bumper. We immediately stopped talking and looked behind us to see who was there. What we saw was just unbelievable. There was a dark figure at the back of the truck, as if it were standing on the bumper, but it didn't look like a regular person. It barely rose above the tailgate, so it couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall. It had a hood, almost like a cloak. I couldn't make out any details of its face, just an outline. It was a quick sighting, maybe a second, but it felt like longer. In that split second, I turned to look at Josh, hoping he'd confirm what I'd seen, but he was already out of the truck, walking around to the back to check it out. I freaked out, locked my door, jumped to the middle of the truck, and yelled for him to get back inside. I had no idea what he thought he was going to do back there, but Josh wasn't the type to get scared easily. He came back to the truck, though, looking genuinely freaked out. I asked him what he saw, but he said there was nothing there. I think that scared him more than anything. We both scanned the area, but there was nothing. No place to hide, no one running off into the night. And it was a well-lit area, so we would have seen if someone had tried to get away. Plus, who'd be out at 3 a.m. in a dark hood in such a remote area? It wasn't a high-traffic place by any means. We didn't stick around to try and find out. He dropped me off not long after, and we called it a night. We talked about it a few times later, but we didn't tell anyone else for a while because it was hard to explain. Besides, it's tough to start a story with. So, my guy friend and I were out riding dirt roads late one night, without people jumping to conclusions. Haha. To this day, it's one of those things I can't explain. The figure itself was strange and chilling, but what really got me was seeing Josh so scared. He isn't the type to back down, and for once, he was visibly shaken. I didn't feel anything evil from the figure, but it definitely spooked us. Now, it's just a good story to tell. I don't know if it was a prankster, a ghost, or just some curious spirit wanting to mess with 2 kids who should have been home at that hour. I guess we'll never know. When I was 7, I had a strange experience that I'll never forget. Now, at 17, I still think back on it, and it sometimes feels like it happened just yesterday. This all took place in my maternal grandparents' house in southeast Georgia, a house where odd occurrences have happened over the years to multiple family members. One night, I was spending the night at their house, as I often did when I was little. Before bed, my grandmother told me to go brush my teeth. I went into the hallway bathroom, leaving the door halfway open, just out of habit. After brushing, I looked at my reflection, inspecting my teeth, and then something made me turn my head to the left. There, just beyond the half-open door, I saw a white gown pass by. The fabric seemed to glow faintly, though not brightly, and I only caught a glimpse before it disappeared down the hall. I didn't see a face, just the gown, almost floating past the doorway. I stood there for a moment, hoping the figure would pass by again, but it didn't. So, I finally left the bathroom and walked back into the living room, where my grandparents were sitting in their recliners watching TV. I asked my grandma, who was in her nightgown, if she had just walked down the hall. She assured me she hadn't moved from her chair. When I told them what I'd seen, neither of them seemed surprised. My grandmother just nodded and said, "You must have seen your Granny Howard." Granny Howard was her mother, who had lived with them in her later years, in the bedroom at the end of the hallway. My grandma said it as if seeing family spirits was just a normal thing, and maybe to her it was. Over the years, many strange things happened in that house. When my grandpa had lung cancer, he once dreamed, or maybe it wasn't a dream, that his own mother appeared to him, saying she'd come to take him with her. He told her he wasn't ready to go, and she simply left. Another time, my cousin, who now lives in that house, took a selfie in her bedroom, which used to be my grandparents' room. When she looked at the photo later, there was a strange greenish smoke in the background, and within the smoke, she swore she could make out the faces of our grandparents. There were times when my younger brother, who once spent a day alone at the house after refusing to go to school, saw or heard things too. While he was sitting in the living room, a pot that had been set far back on the kitchen counter suddenly fell to the floor. He was so freaked out that he went outside and waited until my aunt got home. My aunt and her kids, who live there now, also noticed strange things. Their dog barks at one particular spot in the kitchen, where my grandfather always sat at the dining table before he passed. The dog won't approach the spot. He just stands at a distance, barking. We all remember that my grandparents weren't fond of having animals around, especially indoors, so it's strange that the dog reacts that way. Even today, odd things happen in that house. Sometimes the refrigerator door will open by itself. It makes us laugh because my grandpa always scolded us for leaving the fridge open. Once, while my aunt and cousins were watching TV, it suddenly turned off without any other power going out. They turned it back on immediately, but it was a moment that made everyone pause. The strangest thing happened more recently when my mom was in the hospital for surgery. She pointed out a bird sitting on a ledge of the building across from us. This bird was watching us intently, and it didn't fly away for a long time. My mom thought it might be a sign from her mother, like maybe her spirit had come to check on us. My dad brushed it off, thinking she was being silly, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something to it. Now, back at our own home, things have started happening again. Just today, my younger brother ran into the living room, visibly shaken, and said he'd seen a figure in a black suit in the hallway. I don't know if it was the spirit of a relative or something else, but it creeped me out, and it's made me wonder. Sometimes, I get an unsettling feeling in my own room, almost as if I'm not alone. I can't explain it, and my house is new, not the kind of place that would seem haunted. Yet, there are nights when I feel so uncomfortable that I end up sleeping on the couch. Even then, I'll sometimes get an uneasy feeling, like something's around. I've started wondering if there's something about our family that attracts these experiences. Are these spirits just family members visiting, or could they be more sinister? With the eerie experiences over the years, I can't help but worry a little. Should we be concerned? Or should we see this as a family gift or connection, one that keeps our loved ones close, even beyond this life? When my sister Kelly and her family first moved into their house, they noticed little oddities here and there. Cold spots, misplaced items, but at first, Kelly brushed them off, thinking she was just imagining things. It wasn't until the dryer incident that she truly got spooked. One evening, while she was folding clothes, Kelly noticed the dryer door pop open mid-spin. She assumed a big load of clothes must have nudged it open, so she closed it and turned away. But the door opened again. This time, her hair stood on end. She moved toward the dryer to close it once more, but before she could touch it, the door slammed shut on its own, and she heard the faint laughter of a child. Kelly was terrified. She dropped the clothes and ran to the couch, curling up there until her husband, Jorge, came home. She explained what had happened, but he just laughed it off, helping her gather the clothes and reassuring her it was probably nothing. For the next few weeks, things seemed normal, and Kelly managed to forget about the incident. Then, one afternoon while cleaning, Kelly tried to open the door to the garage, but it wouldn't budge. The knob turned, but it felt as if something was blocking it. She figured the door might be stuck from the heat outside, but she did notice a strange, cold spot right by the door, even though it was nearly 90 degrees out, and there was no AC vent nearby. Later, when Jorge came home for lunch, Kelly asked him to check the door. He opened it without any effort, which left Kelly dumbfounded. She decided to try it herself after he left, and once again, the door wouldn't open for her. This time, she heard a low, eerie chuckle. As time went on, more strange things kept happening. Items would disappear only to show up later in ridiculous places. Then there was the constant call-and-response game with her children. One evening while cooking, her daughter Ariel walked in, saying, "Yes, Mom." Confused, Kelly said she hadn't called her, but Ariel insisted she'd heard her mom's voice. Moments later, her young son Diego walked in, asking if she had called for him too. This happened repeatedly, even though Kelly hadn't called them at all. Eventually, Kelly had to physically go get them when dinner was ready, because they kept thinking they heard her calling. As the months passed, Kelly began seeing shadows around the house. Having a bit of a sixth sense, this wasn't her first time dealing with unusual experiences. Eventually, she came to believe there were two spirits in the house, a middle-aged man and a little girl, around 4 or 5 years old. Over time, she got used to their presence, although every now and then, they would still manage to catch her off guard. One day, Kelly rushed home and headed straight for the bathroom. As she sat there, she heard the familiar laugh of the little girl. Alone in the house, she realized her little ghost had come to play. Then, suddenly, all the drawers and cabinets in the bathroom flew open. Startled, Kelly finished her business in record time and stood up, telling the spirit, "That's not funny. You're freaking me out." She heard the giggle again, but soon felt the presence disappear. She closed the cabinets and left, a bit shaken but accustomed to the antics by now. Other family members and visitors have also noticed the little girl. She has been spotted entering the children's room and has been heard playing with toys there. Fewer people have seen the male spirit, but Kelly has a sense that he's watching over the little girl, like a guardian. I've even had my own experience with the little girl. One afternoon, I was sitting on my sister's couch watching TV. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a small figure dart into Diego's room. Since I knew the kids weren't home, I turned to Kelly and said, "I think I just saw a shadow." She asked, "Was it short or tall?" When I told her it was short, she shrugged and said, "That's just the little girl. She probably wants to play in Diego's room." Kelly's house seems to have two resident spirits, and while they can be mischievous, they don't seem to mean any harm. They've become part of the family in a strange way, just little reminders that they're still around. When I was in 3rd grade, around 9 years old, I had a close friend named John. We were inseparable at school, hanging out daily during lunch and recess, and I'd often sleep over at his place or he at mine. One spring, something strange started happening. John became fixated on certain words, asking to look up unusual ones in the dictionary: powerful, bothers, devil, and similar words. When I asked him why he was interested in these words, he explained that they'd been appearing and disappearing in a library book he'd checked out from school. At first, I was intrigued but skeptical. I had a sense of mystery about the whole thing, and though I half believed him, I didn't think much more of it until he showed me the book. Sure enough, scattered throughout the book were phrases like "PD bothers" and "the powerful devil bothers," written in an ornate, italicized script. It didn't look like the handwriting of any kid I knew, and I was baffled. I asked John to let me examine it further, so I memorized a page with the writing, set the book down, counted to 20, and then reopened it. To my surprise, the writing was completely gone, as if it had never been there at all. This was the moment when I started to believe John's story. Over the following weeks, John confided in me more about what he was experiencing. He began to talk about seeing beings almost daily, two distinct entities that he described with unsettling detail. One was a glowing orb with a face that would alternate between male and female, and the other was a tall, red, horned figure that he called a demon, standing about 7 feet tall. His descriptions would have sounded like nonsense to me before, but after seeing the disappearing words firsthand, I couldn't dismiss his story so easily. The strangest proof he showed me came a few weeks later. One day, John brought a piece of aged, worn-looking paper to school. On it was a detailed drawing of the Loch Ness Monster that looked exactly like an illustration from the book he'd shown me earlier, but it wasn't traced. It was intricately drawn, far beyond what a 3rd grader could do. Beneath the drawing were the words, "The powerful devil bothers you." John claimed he'd found the paper that morning, outside his house near the bus stop. There was always something unsettling about John's house. Both my brother and I felt a strange unease whenever we were there. We couldn't pinpoint if it was the house, the land, or maybe even John's family. Whatever it was, it made us feel like something was off. As we got older and moved into middle school, I stayed in touch with John for a bit, but his stories became less frequent, and he grew more withdrawn when I brought up the topic. He would say he still saw things. Now it was a smaller, grayish demon that he often claimed to see near certain trees. He'd point it out, saying things like, "It's standing right by that tree, staring at us." But whenever I looked, there was nothing. Eventually, John and I drifted apart after middle school, and I haven't seen him since high school. The experiences he shared left a lasting impression on me, though. I haven't had many paranormal encounters myself, aside from one instance where a door shut in front of me in an old home. But those eerie memories of John and the mysterious writing in the Loch Ness Monster book have stayed with me, lingering as something I can't quite explain. A year ago, in the middle of a slow, hot summer, I had an experience that still haunts me. As an only child, my days were usually spent alone, wandering around and exploring. I had a favorite spot, a creek nearby, that I often followed, trying to find where it ended, though I never did. One day, however, my curiosity drew me somewhere else, a graveyard near the creek. The cemetery was on the grounds of a church built in the 1840s. According to a plaque on a stone in front of the church, it had burned down in 1913 and was rebuilt in 1916. Something about this place pulled at me, but I decided to wait until twilight to explore it, thinking that dusk would add to the intrigue. As the sun began to set, I returned to the church and graveyard. I noticed an electrician working on a power line nearby, using a crane to reach the top of the pole. Not wanting to be seen, I parked my bike behind the church. Oddly, the grounds felt forbidden, like I wasn't supposed to be there. It was strange to feel that way, especially at a church. Ignoring the feeling, I wandered through the graves, reading the names and dates on the headstones. There were graves for mothers, fathers, children, and even some Civil War soldiers. The oldest I found was a man named Seth, who had died in 1849. The most recent grave belonged to a woman named Molly and Lily, who'd passed in 2008. Many stones were unmarked, adding to the eerie atmosphere. As I prepared to leave, I felt a sudden drop in temperature. When I had arrived, it was around 86 degrees, but now it felt closer to 50. A strange chill ran down my spine. For some reason, I turned to look back at the graveyard, and that's when I saw it. A large, dark, hooded figure standing by Seth's grave. It emanated a powerful sense of anger and pain. It didn't take long for me to realize what it was. A demon. The moment I understood this, the figure turned toward me. My legs went numb, and I fell to the ground, paralyzed with fear. I tried to crawl away, my mind racing, but I couldn't stand up. As I watched, the demon began moving toward me, slowly at first, then faster. Suddenly, it flew, truly flew like a bullet, straight in my direction. I wanted to scream but couldn't. That's when the electrician, high up on the crane, noticed the figure and yelled out. The demon veered off, heading straight toward him instead. I watched as he lost his balance and fell off the platform, plummeting toward the ground. But just before he hit the earth, he vanished. The crane and all his equipment disappeared as well, as if they had never been there. Later, I found out that no one had been hurt, and no one had been working on any power lines in that area. It left me deeply disturbed. Why had I seen such a vivid vision of a man falling? Why did the demon appear, and why did it seem so real? I still don't know the answers, but I can't shake the feeling that there was some message in that experience. Something I need to understand. Perhaps one day I'll find out the truth. The night my dad passed away in 1987 is one I'll never forget. Anyone who's lost a parent understands the heartache that stays with you. That night, after he died, my mom, my sister, my grandparents, uncles, and aunts all gathered in the hospital hallway while the nurses prepared my dad for the mortician. My two youngest sisters, Kelly and Ginger, were left at home with a family member. They were too young to be there, and it was late. We planned to tell them in the morning, thinking it would be gentler that way. But that night, Kelly, who was 12, had an experience that gives me chills even now. As Kelly lay asleep, she felt someone gently shaking her awake. Groggily, she mumbled, "What?" Then her eyes flew open. She recognized the voice. It was our dad's. He was leaning over her, smiling. Kelly, still half asleep, said, "Daddy, what are you doing here? Are you feeling better?" Did they let you out of the hospital? Dad just looked at her softly and said, No, sweetie. I just wanted to let you know that I'm all right. I came to say goodbye and to tell you that I love you and your sisters very much. And with that, he turned and walked down the hall. Confused and thinking it was real, Kelly got up and called after him, asking him to wait. But as she followed him, he suddenly vanished into a bright light. Moments later, my mom entered the room, hearing Kelly's screams and cries echoing down the hallway. When she asked Kelly what had happened, Kelly looked at her and said, Daddy is dead. He came to tell me goodbye. My mom was shocked. She hadn't told Kelly or Ginger yet about his passing, and no one in the house knew. Years later, when Kelly was grown and had a daughter of her own, something equally surreal happened. Her daughter Ariel, then about 3 years old, was playing and chatting away as if she had company. Kelly went to check on her and, seeing no one there, asked, Who are you talking to? Ariel replied simply, My granddaddies. Kelly hadn't talked much to Ariel about our dad, and her grandfather on her dad's side had only recently passed away. Kelly hadn't told her daughter about the loss yet, thinking she was too young to understand. Curious, Kelly asked, What do you mean by your granddaddies? Ariel, with the innocence only a child could have, said, They're playing with me, Mommy. She stopped, turned as if listening to someone, and then said, They said not to worry. They're in a very good place. By now, Kelly was spooked. She decided to play along, knowing her daughter couldn't possibly know the names of either her grandfathers, especially since she'd never mentioned them to Ariel before. Ariel, she said, if they're here, ask them their names. Ariel turned to the blank wall, as if someone were standing there, and asked, What is your name? She then turned back to Kelly and said, Irving Were Jr. Kelly's heart skipped a beat. That was her grandfather's name, but she thought maybe Ariel had somehow heard it mentioned in passing. Still, she was curious. Ariel then turned to the wall again, paused, and asked, And what is your name? Then, without missing a beat, she looked back at her mom and said, Marvin Edward Golden. Kelly was stunned. She left the room quickly, her heart pounding as she went to her own room and started to cry. She knew, without any doubt, that she had never mentioned our father's full name, Marvin Edward Golden, to Ariel. There was no possible way for her to know that name. In that moment, Kelly realized that somehow, through the unexplainable, both our dad and grandfather had come through to let us know that they were still watching over us. In 1954, I was a fearless 10-year-old tomboy, never backing down from rough games with my friends in Keikaha, Kauai. Our house sat right on the beachfront, and the place was our playground. On weekends, a gang of us, kids from nearby homes, would head to the beach to play in the sand and the surf. Our playground, however, wasn't an ordinary stretch of sand. It was an old Hawaiian graveyard from the 1800s. There were no headstones, just a few barbed wire enclosures marking the spot. One Saturday, under clear blue Hawaiian skies, we were playing and running around near the highway when the sand beneath me suddenly gave way. I fell through, landing right inside a wooden coffin. I looked down to find a skeleton lying there, hands crossed at its waist, perfectly intact. One of the boys, eager to claim a trophy, asked me to pass up a tooth. Then he wanted more, the skull, arm bones, and leg bones. One by one, I handed the bones up, none of us realizing the seriousness of what we were doing. Once I climbed out of the hole, the boys suggested using the skull and bones to play baseball. I became the pitcher, holding the skull, while an older boy got ready to bat. I threw it once, and he missed. On the second pitch, he struck the skull, and it cracked with a sharp blow, leaving a small hole in the forehead. Almost immediately, the sky darkened, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a downpour. As we grabbed the bones to head home, a loud drumming sound echoed across the beach. Boom, boom, boom. It was the unmistakable sound of Hawaiian ceremonial drums. Panic set in, and we bolted across the highway to my friend's house, dropping the bones on the porch of an old Hawaiian man, whom we called Tutu. He came outside, took one look at the scattered bones, and his face darkened. What you kids did, he yelled. These bones are kapu, sacred. Take them back now. A neighbor who had heard the commotion came out, taking charge of the situation. He placed the bones in a brown burlap bag, started up his tractor, and brought us back to the graveyard. Together, we dug a hole and carefully placed the bones back into the ground, saying prayers and asking forgiveness. When we returned home, my father gave me and my sisters a stern lecture about respecting Hawaiian graveyards and the spirits of our ancestors. That evening, during dinner, the lights in the dining room began to flicker, casting eerie shadows around us. My father told us that these were signs from the spirits, a reminder of the respect we had failed to show. My sisters and I came down with a fever that night, and our dogs began to howl for hours, as if they sensed something we couldn't see. The next day, curiosity drew us back to the graveyard. To our shock, the hole where we'd reburied the bones was open, with the empty burlap bag lying beside it. A strong wind suddenly whipped around us, sending a chill down our spines. Silently, we looked at each other, feeling the weight of what we had disturbed. Later that day, we sat near the beach, reflecting on the strange events, when a tall Hawaiian man with a beard approached us. He had an air of wisdom and authority. He told us, "Behave, kids, and no be kalohi, troublemakers." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing as suddenly as he'd appeared. We never saw him again. That weekend haunted us for a long time. Now, as adults with families of our own, we still talk about that day. Every time I visit Keikaha, I stop by that gravesite to pay my respects. Years later, I noticed a real estate sign on the property, advertising it for sale. I spoke to a local realtor, sharing the story of that beach and the graves. After hearing about it, she removed the sign. Some places hold memories and spirits that demand respect, and Keikaha's beach is one of them. In 1954, I was a fearless 10-year-old tomboy, never backing down from rough games with my friends in Keikaha, Kauai. Our house sat right on the beachfront, and the place was our playground. On weekends, a gang of us, kids from nearby homes, would head to the beach to play in the sand and the surf. Our playground, however, wasn't an ordinary stretch of sand. It was an old Hawaiian graveyard from the 1800s. There were no headstones, just a few barbed wire enclosures marking the spot. One Saturday, under clear blue Hawaiian skies, we were playing and running around near the highway when the sand beneath me suddenly gave way. I fell through, landing right inside a wooden coffin. I looked down to find a skeleton lying there, hands crossed at its waist, perfectly intact. One of the boys, eager to claim a trophy, asked me to pass up a tooth. Then he wanted more, the skull, arm bones, and leg bones. One by one, I handed the bones up, none of us realizing the seriousness of what we were doing. Once I climbed out of the hole, the boys suggested using the skull and bones to play baseball. I became the pitcher, holding the skull, while an older boy got ready to bat. I threw it once, and he missed. On the second pitch, he struck the skull, and it cracked with a sharp blow, leaving a small hole in the forehead. Almost immediately, the sky darkened, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a downpour. As we grabbed the bones to head home, a loud drumming sound echoed across the beach. Boom, boom, boom. It was the unmistakable sound of Hawaiian ceremonial drums. Panic set in, and we bolted across the highway to my friend's house, dropping the bones on the porch of an old Hawaiian man, whom we called Tutu. He came outside, took one look at the scattered bones, and his face darkened. "What you kids did," he yelled. "These bones are kapu, sacred. Take them back now." A neighbor who had heard the commotion came out, taking charge of the situation. He placed the bones in a brown burlap bag, started up his tractor, and brought us back to the graveyard. Together, we dug a hole and carefully placed the bones back into the ground, saying prayers and asking forgiveness. When we returned home, my father gave me and my sisters a stern lecture about respecting Hawaiian graveyards and the spirits of our ancestors. That evening, during dinner, the lights in the dining room began to flicker, casting eerie shadows around us. My father told us that these were signs from the spirits, a reminder of the respect we had failed to show. My sisters and I came down with a fever that night, and our dogs began to howl for hours, as if they sensed something we couldn't see. The next day, curiosity drew us back to the graveyard. To our shock, the hole where we'd reburied the bones was open, with the empty burlap bag lying beside it. A strong wind suddenly whipped around us, sending a chill down our spines. Silently, we looked at each other, feeling the weight of what we had disturbed. Later that day, we sat near the beach, reflecting on the strange events, when a tall Hawaiian man with a beard approached us. He had an air of wisdom and authority. He told us, "Behave, kids, and no be kalohi, troublemakers." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing as suddenly as he'd appeared. We never saw him again. That weekend haunted us for a long time. Now, as adults with families of our own, we still talk about that day. Every time I visit Keikaha, I stop by that gravesite to pay my respects. Years later, I noticed a real estate sign on the property, advertising it for sale. I spoke to a local realtor, sharing the story of that beach and the graves. After hearing about it, she removed the sign. Some places hold memories and spirits that demand respect, and Keikaha's beach is one of them.